The little town I live in is really closer to a village in terms of its size. We're not near any major freeways. We're located deep in the woods, far north of any cities or towns you would have heard of. I say that the place is creepy only by the standards of the general public, which I observe on TV. Since my family has lived here for generations, it's normal enough for me. I watch a lot of TV. As a cable guy, it's kind of a prerequisite. The big cable company, which supplies the cable service in town, doesn't like to send its people in too often. There's been too many accidents, so I've pretty much got a monopoly on installations and service calls in town. I don't get a lot of business. Since most of the residents are very old, they don't have much use for internet or cable TV. Occasionally, I'll recruit my brother if I need a hand on a busy day. In the summer, we get the occasional nosy tourist who heard about the place from a website or a friend. We try to keep them blind to what happens here, but things get past us sometimes, feeding the rumors online more and more. We've had more tourists in the summer months lately, and they don't always return from their trip to Hallows Inn. Of course, that's not the real name. I'd never tell you that, as it would only feed the rumor mill. But let me assure you, it is equally malevolent sounding. I'm sure the name only stokes the fires of the public's burning curiosity about the place, but there's no changing what we are. Although I've lived here all my life, I never quite know what I'll walk into during most of my service calls. Those who live in town keep to themselves, and they keep their secrets close. As much as I like to believe, I know what's going on in my own backyard. I have only vague suspicions and rumors to rely on for the most part. However, being a cable technician, you do gain access to people's houses, and as such, see the side of them residing there that few others see. Not everyone cleans up when the cable guy visits. The town's residents no longer call the cable company when they have a problem. They call me directly. I call the cable company myself if I have to, and ask them for whatever assistance I need. Occasionally we need to call on the cable company's maintenance crew, who eventually make their way into town to fix the trunk line should it have noise issues or damage from a storm. Occasionally an amplifier will need to be replaced, or God forbid, a tap. As strange as my little hometown is, and I'll get to the specifics of that soon enough, it's gotten far weirder around here lately. There's something going on which has prompted me to begin this journal. I think about the metaphor of a frog dropped into a pot of boiling water and jumping out. How if the water is cool when he gets in and it's heated gradually, he'll slowly boil to death. I think I'm the frog in the lukewarm pot of water that is Hallows Inn. The recent strangeness started when a large storm front passed through recently, knocking down a handful of cable lines and creating a lot of extra work for me and my brother who I had to call in for assistance. Storms pass through here a lot, and more recently, they've been almost constant. This makes life difficult as we're surrounded by trees and branches tend to fall down in high winds. We were over at the sister's house and they were desperate for us to get their Wi-Fi back up and running. I checked the signal level and found it was dead at the PoE point of entry. I went outside and found the culprit to be a collapsed tree which had brought down the big RG11 line coming into the back of the house from the telephone pole. The large downed tree had been reported to me by the sisters when I first arrived, and I had a feeling it was the source of the trouble. They were eager to get the Wi-Fi back up and running for their weekly coven meeting. They were broadcasting via Zoom for the immunocompromised members of the group. I got out in the backyard and saw that my sister's garden was blooming brilliantly as usual. Tomato plants loomed over me, 10 and 12 feet high, despite the fact that it was only June. Corn stalks resembling small trees lined one section. These were almost liable to fall over and bring down a cable line one of these days. Amused to myself, only half jokingly. The sister's black cat followed me around the big backyard as I did my inspection, ready to report to the sisters if I touched anything I wasn't supposed to. I walked farther back with her at my heels and got to the point of the garden where the telephone poles stood. They carried power, phone lines, and coaxial cable lines, so I had to check for voltage before proceeding any further. No sense wasting more time now if the power company needed to be called first anyways, I thought. I walked up and pulled out the voltage meter from my tool bag, which I carried with me everywhere. It was full of useful things and very heavy. I walked up and held out the voltage meter, checking the base of the telephone pole for stray voltage. The little light shone green, indicating there was no voltage present. I could hang a new RG11 and code a 16 into our system, since the line was over 200 feet long. A cool 25 bucks. Not to mention the $20 for the initial service call. It was shaping up to be a lucrative morning. This would take an hour at most. I turned around to head back to my van and stopped cold. The plants at the back of the garden, far off to my left, weren't looking good at all. There was a patch of malicious black rot spreading from a central point, which looked vile, full of hatred and bubbling at its core. What the hell is that? I said to myself. I looked over at the sister's cat who'd been following me. It was growling a low, deep, guttural sound, then hissing at the strange black spot. It stopped abruptly and stood there, listening for a moment. Then it abandoned me and ran back to the house. I looked closer at the bubbling blackness at the center of the spreading disease, or whatever it was. It gave off an unpleasant feeling, sending shivers down my spine. I saw a veiny eye open up in the tarry center of it. The eye stared at me briefly with its red maliciousness and blinked, then disappeared again. Not good. Not good at all. The sisters ran out a minute later. They looked with grave concern at the black spot growing at the back of their garden. They conversed for a minute, then came over to me. "You should not be here for this," the two said in unison. "We have to call the other sisters. This evil cannot be dispelled by just the two of us." I was a bit disappointed, but only a bit. Changing a 200-foot aerial cable in 100-degree weather isn't much fun, kids, let me tell you. I would just come back another day to do it, whenever the sisters told me it was safe to come back. You know, I saw an eye in the middle of that thing. I told them. What color was it? One said, "Did it see you? Did it see your face?" Said the other, "It was red. Yeah, it looked right at me. It saw me." Gathered my thoughts. Should I be worried? Yes, they answered the question in unison again, sending shivers up my spine. "Is there anything I can do?" I asked, suddenly sweating heavily. "Pray to your God we can kill it if you wish." And with that, they went back to the house, and I followed quickly behind them. Things haven't been going well since that day. And the sisters haven't called to say they're ready for me to come back. Meaning that horrible blackness is still growing, getting bigger day by day. Part of me needs to go back to see how far it spread. But I'm worried if I get there and I see it, will it see me? Maybe I should listen to the sisters and just stay away. I haven't been sleeping much since my last service call at my sister's house last week. Every time I close my eyes now, I see a red unblinking eye about the same size and shape as the one I saw that day. Like the after image of a flash bulb burnt into my retinas. It visits me in my dreams and haunts me every time I blink. I try to forget it's there, but I'm reminded of it constantly. It never leaves me alone. Just sits there on the backs of my eyelids, waiting for its chance to peek at me again. I've started to avoid blinking as much as possible to avoid it, causing my eyes to become irritated and sore. But it's better than seeing that eye all the time. It's spooky. The sisters still haven't called or reached out to say they're ready for me to return to complete my service call. No one's seen them around town at all. Or any of the other sisters for that matter. The coven was typically very involved in the local community. The weekly farmers market they ran was a mainstay of the town. No one from the group showed up to sell veggies this week in the town square. I decided today to make my way back to my sister's house. I had to see if they were okay. They'd always been good to me if I saw a spreading black mass of malicious intent heading from the field towards me. Full of red evil eyes and teeth, I just hightail it out of there. I got to the street where the sisters lived. They had a few acres with no neighbors nearby, so it was secluded and quiet. My windows were rolled down due to the heat of the day, currently at its peak in the early afternoon. Another sunny 100-plus degree day. It seemed to be either that or thunderstorms lately. Yin or yang. I'd stopped for longer than I needed to at the stop sign, lost in my thoughts. Just as I was about to start moving, a black cat jumped up through my window and ran into my car. The unspoken voice which filled my head sounded like a shout from an angry, gruff, middle-aged man. I looked over and saw the black cat staring at me intently, the scars across his face distinguishing him as scratches. One of the sisters' mini black cats. Only Scratches was special. At this point, you must surely think I'm insane or outright lying about all this. Welcome to Hallows End. Shit, that shouldn't be real. Well, that's just another Tuesday here. Screw you. I'm only 32. And if I'm gruff and angry, it's because there's a damp field full of evil black lava shit back there. Now drive. Before I could even fully form my next thought, I heard the bastard cats retort in my head. They're dead. The sisters are all dead. Every last one of them. Now, can we please get the hell out of here? I looked past him and saw why he was in such a hurry. A black tendril of oily shadow was creeping its way toward us from the grass at the side of the road. Thicker globs of what looked like crude oil or hot tar approached beside it and all around it, forming a line of growing black evil, which was flowing slowly like lava towards town. A passerby from out of town might have seen it and thought, I guess a crude oil pipeline must have burst. I knew better. I had seen the eye, and it had seen me. He didn't hesitate any longer, and I stepped on the gas. I looked behind me in the rearview mirror and saw the blackness was still flowing steadily. Trees had begun to fall over in the wake of its decay. We need to call a town meeting. Whatever that is, it's out of control. Scratches sat there staring at me. His deeply scarred face was dirty and covered in mud, as was the rest of him. He smelled terrible. Hey, screw you, asshole, and screw the town may attend. We're going to see the butcher. You know, it's the only thing to do. The butcher. I shuddered, thinking about the last time I'd been to his place. The rats. The roaches. The never-ending stink of blood and entrails. He had a point, though. If anyone could solve this problem, it was him. I drove west towards town and floored it, accelerating as quickly as the disorganized pile of heavy junk in the back of my van would allow. I looked in my mirror again and saw the black stuff was spreading slowly and steadily, about halfway across the road now. Scratches looked exhausted, and even his thoughts sounded tired and disjointed once we were safely away. He lay down on the passenger seat and fell asleep instantly, his leg twitching occasionally as he chased mice in slumberland. The town came into sight as we came over a rise, and I proceeded down Main Street towards the butcher shop. We pulled up out front, and I saw a few pigs turn inside out, hanging from the hooks in the front window, flies buzzing around him as they swayed slightly. The butcher could be seen inside, hacking away at something with a cleaver. Blood spray was flying up into his face and everywhere, splattering the walls behind him and the ceiling above. He didn't look up as I came into the shop, just continued hacking away with a heavy cleaver. It was enormous and looked too heavy for me to lift. The head of the cleaver was the size of a large encyclopedia. The butcher brought it up and down easily and effortlessly with his giant arms, dividing a primal cut of something into manageable pieces meant for sale. In the back freezer, I knew he had plenty of cuts you wouldn't find at any grocery store. Hallows End specials. Sisters couldn't stop it. He spoke in a thunderous baritone. That's right. I was just there. Scratches, and I barely got away. You took that asshole cat with you. Why? You know what he is. I considered, and decided not to explain myself. No one deserved to be killed by that bullshit. Can you help us or not? It's headed this way. It'll take out your shop the same as everything else. He looked up from his meat, set down his cleaver, and wiped his hands off on a bloody towel he tucked into his apron. He seemed to consider for a moment whether his shop being destroyed meant anything to him. The butcher was famously non-materialistic and known for his stoicism. You assume it can be killed. You assume too much. Same as the sisters. I don't understand if we can't kill it. How do we stop it? You have to kill the source of it. This thing is not natural. It was created by someone. Someone here. In Hallows End. Who would do that? Who would create something so evil? The butcher shrugged. He looked at me and pointed with his giant cleaver. You're the one to check. You go around, tell everyone you're doing a free service upgrade or something. Poke around and try to find this sick son of a bitch. I'll take care of the rest. He went back to his work again, as if he just asked for the simplest thing in the world. How was I supposed to find this mad scientist? Where do mad scientists even live? Do they have cable? Or do they use satellite heathens? I got back into my van and saw I now had an upgrade call pending on my computer screen's work list. The appointment was showing red, indicating I was somehow already late. Despite the fact that the job hadn't even been on my screen 5 minutes ago, I silently cursed the dispatcher and took out my phone to call the number on the screen. At least this was going to check one house off my list of potential suspects. I could poke around and ask a few questions at this house as well. See if this guy knew anything useful. Hello. The disgruntled voice of an older man picked up the phone. Yeah, this is Jerome with the cable company. I was just about to head over to your place to set you up with your new modem. Is it alright if I head over now? No, that isn't right at all. They told me they were going to give me the internet. You know, I am so sick of your company. I swear to God, if you sons of bitches didn't have a monopoly out here. I tried to explain that we were going to get him the internet, and that's what the modem did, but he just told me to get my ass over there and hurry up since I was already late as it was. He then abruptly hung up. I was left feeling slightly annoyed, but only slightly. I was used to ignorant people berating me and ignoring my sensible attempts to educate them. It was amazing how many people still didn't know that the internet was not something floating in the ether, that Wi-Fi needed a connection via cable to a larger system to function. Those same people thought that as a cable guy, it was your job to set up their printer. Their new laptop they don't know how to use and set up an email address for them. All because they finally decided to join the electronic revolution. Of course, none of these things are things we are paid for or are trained to do. I tried to politely GTFO. I drove up to the address, which was northwest, just a little ways out of town. It had been a slow day, so dispatch had started to get creative with my service area. I was headed north of the black stuff, which I kept a lookout for on my right. Paranoid its spread could have quickened. When I arrived at the house, I saw it was a simple bungalow with a big country lawn and a large black pickup truck parked out front, which appeared brand new. I saw a second driveway past the house led further into the property, where several large trucks were parked near a large warehouse. They looked like oil tankers. Alarm bells began to ring in my head. Oil tankers would mean oil, and there were no oil fields nearby. But that black stuff did look like crude oil, almost, except with the addition of evil red eyes that haunt your dreams. I backed my van into the driveway and parked. I put out my useless orange traffic cones, which were mandated by company policy to be used during service calls. One out in front of the left tire and one behind to the right to protect the van and ward off something. I grabbed my work bag and put my tool belt on. I pulled a fresh modem out of the back and brought it up to the front door with me. The house was old but well maintained. The owner was an odd man who kept to himself and only came into town for necessities. The warehouse out back, the second driveway, the tankers, those were all new. I'd never seen them before. It was as if they'd sprung up overnight, although it had been at least a month since I'd been up this way, maybe more. This sent the alarm bells ringing in my head into a full-blown wailing siren with the big red flashing lights. Hallows End is a simple town in many ways. There isn't a lot of money here. Someone new was in town, and they were supplying this man, Bill Waterton, according to his account info, with a lot of money and equipment. But for what? I knocked on the door, and the man who answered was dressed in blue jeans and a clean white t-shirt. He did not appear to be happy to see me. Hello, sir. We spoke on the phone. My name's Jerome. I'm a cable technician for... I know who you are. Just get in here. I walked into his house and asked where he wanted the modem to be set up. I explained it needed to be in a central location to reach all areas of the house, since this one had a built-in wireless router. He seemed to understand that and directed me to his office. There wasn't a cable connection in there, so I explained I would need to drill down to the basement through the floorboards. I wasn't about to start fishing a cable line, creating a wall outlet for this guy. We don't get paid to do that anyways, since it's much more difficult and time-consuming. He agreed and pointed to a spot in the corner behind a plant where a hole would not be visible in the wooden floorboards. I went out and grabbed my drill and the 2-foot-long drill bit I had for such purposes. I was trying to think of a way to get to this guy's boss. I had a sudden brainstorm and tried to act as casual as possible when I was back inside conversing with him after the job was done. So this internet's fast, right? Like, am I going to be able to watch a movie without it doing that spinny, bloating thing all the time? The man asked. Buffering. Yeah, it'll give you 500 megabytes, which should definitely be fast enough to stream a movie or a YouTube video. By the way, I'm trying to spread the word about this. We're doing upgrades for a huge discount if you're referred through an existing customer. And I'd also give you 20 bucks cash right now, a referral bonus. Do you know anyone who would want a cheap upgrade on their internet to give them a faster connection? I hope this didn't sound too fishy. He looked at me suspiciously for a second, then smiled. My boss was saying that his internet is way slower here than where he used to live. He told me not to go around talking about him. He's real private-like. But I think he'd be alright with this. Let me call him. He lives just right up that gravel road. Got him a nice prefab house up there. Sprung that thing up practically overnight. Dropped in by big helicopters, believe it or not. The puzzle pieces were beginning to fit together slowly. Now I just had to find out how this all related to the insanity that had sprung a leak out in the sisters' fields. I think it's best I call him, don't you? That way he doesn't have to know you even said anything. How's that? I took a crisp 20 and held it out to him. He took it and nodded. Pleasure doing business with you, he said. I left the house and headed back to the van. Where was I going in there alone? I was going back to town for backup. It was time to get the butcher. When I got back to town, the sun was just beginning to set. The butcher was closing up a shop and seemed to be anticipating me as I pulled up to the curb in front of his shop. He opened my passenger door and dropped his giant hulking body into the seat uninvited. Scratches leapt out of the way, waking up from his nap and in. His cat reflexes, saving him from being crushed to death. The butcher weighed easily 350 pounds. The van dropped to the right with the weight of his body, shaking the whole van as it seesawed back and forth with his bulk. Good job. You found him quick. Let's go kill the son of a bitch. I'm a little worried. It looks like there's only one way in and around. He might be expecting us. We might need backup. He looked me in the eyes, measuring my words. His skin was puckered and red around the scars which crisscrossed his eyes and arms. His entire body looked like it had been stitched together in pieces. No one knew where the scars were from, but there were plenty of rumors. Good idea, he said. Can never be too careful. This is a dangerous character we're dealing with. Better call in the cavalry. Why don't you do a lap around town square? He told me what he wanted to do, and I began to honk my horn and drive slowly around the town square. The butcher rolled down his window and yelled out in his loud, baritone voice, "Citizens of Hallows Inn, we are under attack. Gather at Town Hall for further instructions." He shouted this again and again. I began to see people emerging from their houses in the gathering darkness. A lone man, impossibly tall, dressed in a dapper suit with a tall hat, strode with purpose towards the town square. His eyes glowed like embers. He nodded at us and continued forward. I recognized him as Verdun, the town mortician. A woman, who appeared slightly see-through, walked alongside Steve, the town barber. I saw a couple of tourists pop their heads out of the cafe, but unseen shadowy figures pulled them back inside quickly, their faces covered with chloroformed-doused rags. By the time we stopped in the town square, there were about 100 shadowy figures milling about the place. More were filtering in by the moment. A pair of twins, young girls, dressed in Victorian-era clothing, walked together holding hands and joined the crowd. Their teeth were long, sharp, and pointed as they chatted excitedly to each other. Their eyes were black and their faces fish-like. I looked at the crowd we'd assembled. It was quite a ragtag team, but we'd get the job done. We all love this town too much to see it destroyed by some rich, entitled asshole outsider. I told them all as much, explaining about the wall of evil lava flowing toward town from the sisters' place. People began to talk, and I had to stop briefly until the place quieted down. Everyone was chattering excitedly with nervous voices. If we kill this outsider, it will stop the evil from spreading. The butcher's voice silenced everyone, and they all looked at him. He was the pseudo-leader of the town. We didn't have a mayor, we had a butcher. Then we'll go to his place and kill him. Someone shouted from the back of the crowd. Oh, I wouldn't count on that, my friends. We all looked around for the source of the voice. It sounded like an old man, wise with age and experience, a man used to getting his way. A drone descended from the sky into the midst of us. A loud voice echoed from it. Those who attempt to follow these pathetic fools into battle will be killed alongside them. Your deaths will be slow. They will be painful. I ask you all leave this town now. It belongs to me as of today. Choose to stay and fight, you'll die. Surrender your town to me and run away, children. The voice was arrogant and condescending. Someone picked up a rock and threw it at the drone. It fell from the sky into the crowd, and when it landed, it exploded with a fiery blast that killed a dozen or more townspeople in an instant. Even more were wounded and taken from the fight before it could even begin. Clearly, we had underestimated our opposition. A harsh, mocking laugh came from the sky, and I looked up and saw an even larger drone flying up there. It flew away silently, back towards the northeast, and was gone. I surveyed the carnage in the town square. Bibbins, the local fruit stand operator, was laying on the ground near my feet. The top half of him, anyways. Blood sputtered and sprayed from his lips as he reached down to feel for legs that were no longer there. His intestines hung from the charred and mangled remains of his belly. Blood spurted into the air from an artery. His slack horse face lost its life as his head hung to the side, and he died looking into my eyes. I saw the twins, or just their hands, I should say, still intertwined, hanging from a high tree branch like a sick Christmas ornament. The barber, our version of town doctor, had his hands full. The old man was already comforting a guy with small horns, who I recognized as Jonathan, the clerk from the general store. He had a large piece of something long and sharp impaled through him. His eyes looked frantic. Blood poured from his mouth in rivulets. The worst thing of all, though, was that I looked down and saw Scratches breathing shallowly at my feet. He was breathing intermittently and looking up at me. Blood ran from his ears and was dried in his fur. I was too angry to cry for my friend as I saw he was dying. The cat and I had always shared a special bond. I was the only one who could hear him and had never told anyone about it. The sisters hadn't even known. Maybe I was just hallucinating. All these years the thought had occurred to me. After all, it had been years since I'd taken my antipsychotics. The sisters, they're still alive. I'm a coward. I ran away. They're still there for all I know, fighting for their lives. We're gonna kill that son of a bitch, I said. Scratches didn't hear it, though. He was already gone. Dark clouds began to roll in from the northeast, as if on cue. Fat raindrops came down, slowly at first, then in torrents. Thunder boomed in the dark sky as I heard the wails of dying townspeople all around me. Faces that I'd known all my life were unrecognizable around me. Mutilated by the explosion of C4 or whatever the bastard had rigged to blow on his drone when it crashed, I found the butcher. He was pulling a chunk of shrapnel out of his shoulder. Blood was all over his hands, being washed away by the heavy rain. We spoke for a minute and decided what we'd have to do. He stood up on the pedestal, which had been the base of a statue of his great-grandfather, now mangled by the explosion. Let's go kill that bastard. He raised his heavy cleaver high in the air, and the remaining townfolk raised their own weapons above their heads. Knives, swords, barbers' straight razors, scythes and axes were held high in the rain, and my heart felt full of pride and dull anger as their voices rose up into the air in a war cry, drowning out the thunder. The people of Hallows End had vengeance burning in their eyes. As we made our way east of town, a convoy of mostly old and beat-up vehicles leading toward a mansion none of us had ever seen. We'd only grown in numbers since the explosion. The loners and shy folk on the outskirts of town had been drawn in by the sound of the big boom in the town square. Shadow people, usually elusive and private, had come out of the sewers and joined the crusade to save the town. At the front of the pack was the butcher and his giant black work truck. Thick black diesel smoke billowed from twin exhaust stacks as his engine roared, setting the frantic Mad Max pace of the group. Surrounding him were several bikers driving Harleys, howling like banshees and brandishing long knives, guns and crossbows. Their melted faces were concealed by their dark-tinted helmets. They'd been close to the explosion, but they were tough sons of bitches. I rode behind him, followed by a swarm of other cars, a hearse, an ice cream truck, a school bus, you name it. We drove through the driving rain and crashing thunder and the dark black of night. I looked to the south, my eyes searching for the black ooze to seep onto the road at any moment. I could only guess at how far it had spread. My thoughts drifted to the weird ooze. The butcher had said it was created by the rich bastard, but I wasn't so sure. I thought it looked like crude oil at times. Maybe that was what it actually was. The tanker seemed to confirm that suspicion. Why else would he have them if not to transport that vile black shit somewhere? I thought of Hallows End a bit like the Bermuda Triangle, or one of those other places you hear of where the laws of physics and reality are thin and flimsy. Perhaps it had always been like that here, and the dinosaurs and prehistoric plants which made up the crude were special too, just like us. The boundaries between worlds waned a bit in places like Hallows End. Maybe, just maybe, that black stuff had some power to it, something that could do more than power a car. What if that fuel, when refined, could open a hole between worlds, raise the living from the dead, or create thunderstorms from a beautiful sunny day? Perhaps that fuel could be used to build a weapon that could do a lot more damage than plutonium. I shuddered at the thought. We pulled up to the house, and I saw the customer from my service call earlier was standing out front waiting for us. A determined look on his face. He held the shotgun and was pointing it at the butcher, his finger ready to squeeze the trigger as the giant truck bore down on him. A bolt suddenly appeared in the man's chest, and he dropped his shotgun before he could get a shot off. I saw Gregory, the old hunter, pull the bolt from his chest without even slowing down as he drove past on his Harley. He bounced over the bump at the entrance to the driveway, leading the charge. I got a bit worried as his engine roared and he sped a little bit too far ahead of us, trying to ambitiously scout ahead. I wish there was some way to communicate with him, to tell him to be careful, to look out for traps, but it was too late. I heard a loud crash as he dropped out of view, disappearing into the road. As we pulled closer, we saw a pit had been dug and disguised as a roadway. The bottom of the pit was lined with filthy spikes, which had impaled Gregory through his leg. He howled in pain and cursed. A couple of cars pulled to the side of the road to help, and our numbers dwindled a bit more. As we approached the warehouse, it looked deserted. It appeared that the rich man's workers hadn't been willing to stay and fight his battle for him, or perhaps they were just waiting for us at the mansion, armed to the teeth, I thought. We had to drive awkwardly around a tanker, which was blocking the roadway. There was no other way through. Our caravan moved slowly through the narrow section. My heart was hammering so loudly I could hear it in my ears. I was worried there could be another trap anywhere. Our part of the group was past the tanker when I heard the explosion. I turned back to see a fireball billowing up in the sky, warming my face as I looked out the window. I thought to myself that these things only happen in the movies, but then I looked down and saw the carnage, and it felt all too real again. The explosion had been timed to inflict the most destruction, as I saw that a large portion of our town had been killed. More were tending to the wounded, and others still were trapped behind the inferno, unable to proceed further until it was extinguished. I saw body parts lying scattered everywhere. A decapitated head rolled towards me from the flames, blood spurting from the neck. It stopped rolling, facing my direction about 10 feet away, and I recognized the face immediately to be Vardun, the town mortician. Those of us who were left got out of our vehicles and rallied around the butcher, weapons in hand. "We'll go on foot from here," said the butcher. His stoicism was on full display, as he showed neither anger nor sadness. He looked each of us in the eye. "I'd ask if any of you are scared, if any of you want to turn around and go back. But I can see from your faces that would be pointless. That being said, I have no delusions about us all surviving this. He's clearly prepared for us. We might all die long before we reach him." None of us said anything. We looked at him resolutely. He nodded his head once, turned around, and it began in march. We followed like fresh recruits in ragtag formation up the gravel RD, the butcher leading the way. He had sharp eyes and spotted several traps which we managed to avoid. A bear trap snatched one of the bikers' feet at one point, just as the butcher was about to tell him to watch out. But it was too late. He lay there, screaming at the side of the road, giving away our location to the defenders and the mansion, which was now visible, looming up ahead. As we got closer and the area opened up, the hunters fanned out, searching for sentries. I heard screams from the trees as their sharp eagle eyes picked out the invisible shapes in the shadowy tree line, killing them swiftly with their simple bows and crossbows before the guards could get more than a few shots off. We lost one or two more, and left their lifeless bodies on the gravel road as we continued marching forward in the rain. Thunder and lightning still crashed overhead. Occasionally, a lightning bolt would hit something not too far off, and the ground would shake with the impact. We reached the wrought iron gates of the mansion, and the butcher rattled his huge steel cleaver against them, the loud ringing vibrations echoing into the distance. "We're here for you. You son of a bitch, come on out and take your medicine." The voice we'd heard in the town square began to laugh again, coming from the intercom to our left. "Good luck getting in here, you fools. I see there's not as many of you as there was before. Did you lose a few of your friends along the way?" He began to sing off-key. "Little dirty freaks hidden in your hovels. I make a big bad boom, and you get out your shovels. Ho ho ho." He started to laugh at his own song. He thought he had us beat. The problem for him was this place, Hallows Inn, made us special. We each had our own talents. Mine was that I could make connections. I could troubleshoot problems much better than the average cable technician. I pulled the faceplate off the intercom with my flathead screwdriver and looked at the configuration of cables. I had several tools in my tool belt, which I'd obtained through, let's just say, black market dealers. I opened up another electrical box nearby, and within a few minutes, I heard the buzz of the electrified fence cease. I opened another metal box and played around inside for a little while. The lock clicked open, and the gate swung ajar. We were in. Oh, his laughter abruptly stopped. I heard him screaming obscenities from inside the mansion. We walked forward into the courtyard and stormed the front door, picking up a stone bench and using it to smash our way in. I heard something from up above, but it was too late. Something large and heavy fell, crushing three of my comrades. Boiling oil poured out and steamed on the ground. It covered our friends, and we watched in horror as their faces melted, revealing the stark white bone beneath, as their screams turned to shrieks of pure agony. I looked up from the entrance, and I saw the bastard for the first time. Up on the top of the stairs, looking down at us, he was a short, thin man, old and balding, with gold-rimmed glasses and holding a fancy-looking cane. He held a big gold handgun in his other hand, which he began to fire at us, missing with each shot. He looked like he was alone. His eyes were searching frantically, as if there was no one else around here to protect him, and he was terrified of being flanked somehow. Maybe none of his underlings had stuck around after all. Perhaps the troops had abandoned the general when he'd ordered them to fire on their own people. It wouldn't be the first time such a thing had turned the tides of war. We took cover as he continued to fire, but he quickly ran out of bullets. I heard him struggling to reload and nodded at another one of the hunters. Hilda, the sharp-eyed wife of Gregory, nodded back. Her eyes had a fire in them. She clearly wanted revenge for her husband, whose leg wound had looked gruesome after he fell into the pit of spikes. She readied her crossbow, took a deep breath, let it out, and stood up. Her eyes looked intently through the sights of her weapon, and she aimed for the man who had caused so much ruin. The bolt was released, and time seemed to slow to a crawl as it flew through the air. It hit the man at the top of the stairs in the neck, and he screamed out in pain, dropping his oversized pistol. It fell down the stairs, the clip still not reloaded. We marched up the lush, expensive-looking crimson carpet which lined the stairs. Fine embroidery could be seen leading upwards, and I couldn't help but marvel at its complexity. Everything in the mansion looked expensive and overpriced. The heads of large, exotic game animals lined the walls everywhere. Huge lions, tigers, bison, and elephants adorned the walls. The ceilings were polished marble with golden trim. When the group of us got to the top of the stairs, there were only a few of us left. The butcher and I looked down at the bald, sputtering asshole who had killed so many of our people. He had no sympathy and was only concerned for himself. He wept and pleaded for his life. His hand gripped tightly a walking stick with a skull on top. Oh, please don't kill me. I'll do anything you want. I have money. How much money do you want? $1 million. $2 million. I can do that. Just let me get my checkbook. I'll make it out to you, my friend. What's your name? He looked at me, and I shook my head. Blood flew and sprayed up and everywhere, as the butcher did what he did best. The screams were loud for a long time. We watched as he made smaller cuts from the larger primal ones, and the man watched as well. His head held to look by us, still alive in some way only the butcher could contrive. By the end, he was begging for death. Only his torso and head left jabbering and pleading for mercy. He did not receive it. The butcher was partial to tourists. They were usually his favorite, but he'd make an exception in this case and make do with a local for his experiments. We took what we wanted from the mansion, and then we burned it to the ground. We got back to the rest of the group, who had by now managed to extinguish the fire caused by the Tinker explosion. The devious trap had killed dozens and wounded just as many more. The survivors looked exhausted and were covered in blood and soot, their eyes full of tears for lost friends and family. But they let up a cheer when we told them what we'd done. We all set up together to finish what was left to do. How would it be accomplished? Well, none of us knew yet. We got to the sisters' place and saw that the blackness had begun to recede already, disappearing down sewers and flowing into streams after the large storm. Speaking of which, the half-moon had begun to show again in the sky as the clouds receded. Maybe the butcher was right after all, that the evil would end when the man was defeated. I couldn't be sure if I was right about my magical crude oil theory, but it felt right to me. The sisters came out to greet us and told us they found a way to stop the leak of the black stuff from beneath the earth. I shared with the sisters about Scratches, how he died, but had been prepared to fight for the town. The other cats sensed my sadness and hung their heads with despair as I told them how he died in my arms. One came over to me and bumped his head against my leg, a funeral hug, then looked up at me with tear-filled green eyes. I hadn't known cats were capable of crying. I figured I'd tell them my theory and my idea to clean up the rest of the ooze with the tankers and suction equipment which we'd brought with us from the warehouse. Perhaps we could salvage what was left and see if we could use it to power the town somehow. That had always been a great cost to our less financially stable residents. You've always been great at making connections, Jerome. Well done, my boy. The butcher nodded and winked at me. I blinked and noticed immediately that the evil eye which had invaded my vision for the last few days was finally gone. I could see clearly in the darkness of my closed eyes again. I could dream and not be haunted by its watchful stare. One of the sisters nodded at me knowingly. She'd been the one who'd asked me that day, "Did it see you?" I nodded back at her, and we stood together in the glow of the half-moon. It had been the first clear night in quite a while. I'll come back later to fix the Wi-Fi, ladies. Don't worry about the service charge. This one's on me. You see, around here, we look out for each other. We don't let outsiders make trouble for anyone in our town. Keep that in mind, stranger, or else you might end up drowning in the silent blackness beneath Hallows Inn. Sweet dreams. I quit working in my uncle's junkyard after only 3 days, and the ghosts weren't the reason why. There was an evil there, an evil that no one else but me would have understood. I only hope that it's truly gone now. I wasn't even supposed to be spending my summer at Uncle Ned's. There was a party, some beers, and then me behind the wheel of the car. Thankfully, I didn't get hurt or cause any real damage. Except in my college career, a DUI arrest put my life in shambles. I was given community service, which was a relief since I was looking at jail time. I was sentenced to teach English Lit at the local juvenile detention center during the day. My term of service was for 10 weeks, starting exactly when I was supposed to go back to school. There was also a hefty fine that my parents didn't want to pay off, which is why I took up a night shift job when my uncle offered. I know I should have been grateful that I'd avoided jail, but at that moment it felt like I was entering my own personal prison. The place was surrounded by a 10-foot-high fence that was topped with barbed wire. The only thing missing were tower guards. I passed under the sign for my uncle's place as I opened the main gate. The weathered lettering read, "Last Chance Parts." The guard dog, a huge Rottweiler that was chained to a metal post, greeted me as I walked up to a tiny one-story office building. A few windows were glazed over with brown grime. One window held an air conditioner that dripped water, which the guard dog lapped up between growls. I was about to open the door when my Uncle Ned walked out. He was wearing a gray designer suit and a red silk tie. I didn't get a hug or even a handshake. Well, there he is, my darling nephew, nearly 10 minutes late on his first day. Great way to make a first impression, he said sarcastically. I mumbled out an apology and hoped we'd go into his air-conditioned office. Uncle Ned went right into a tour of the place, though, and as we walked, he went over the rules for working the night shift at the junkyard. The first rule was don't go to feed Rascal, the guard dog. Uncle Ned gave me a proper introduction to the pooch. Rascal did not let me pet him, but he did stop growling and flashing his teeth. We passed by a row of 16 cars that were in various states of being picked for parts. Some just had metal frames left. Others looked like they could be driven out of the junkyard until my uncle lifted a hood to show there was no engine. All the parts, from door locks to windshields to specific bolts and screws, were cataloged and held in the storage warehouse that sat in the middle of the junkyard. Every mechanic in western Nebraska would call up my uncle whenever they needed a part. He thought of himself as the junker king of the Midwest. But who was that judge? Since I practically had to beg him to even let me work here, we walked into the section of the junkyard where they crushed the cars. There was this huge machine painted a shiny yellow. It looked like a giant toaster oven, but instead of throwing in a slice of bread, you slipped in a car. I asked if I could see it in action. I mean, who doesn't like watching things get crushed? Uncle Ned climbed into a forklift, speared an old car, and then dropped it into space for the automobile. The walls of the car baler then squeezed in from all directions until a 10-foot-long car was nothing more than a coffee table-sized chunk of steel. The sounds of the metal crunching and crackling made me wince. The noise was surprisingly violent, and it was amazing to watch. After the car crashed, Uncle Ned told me another rule. Don't even think of touching, operating, or starting the car baler. If I did and he found out, I would be fired on the spot. He then started to walk me around the perimeter of the place next to the fence. He spouted off the next rule as we strolled. I wasn't allowed to let anyone in after my uncle left for the day. There were no junk car drop-offs at night, and business hours were from 7 a.m. to 6 p.m., so there was no reason for anyone to come by. He also made it clear I wasn't to let in any of my buddies or my girlfriend to hang out with me. If I did and he found out, yep, I'd be fired. To make sure that no one would come in after hours, Uncle Ned would be locking me in when he left for the day. Like I said, it was like my own personal prison. I asked what if something happened to me and I needed help. He laughed, and he told me that if I was dumb enough to get hurt doing this job and needed an ambulance, I deserved to die. Besides, if I really needed help, I could call him, which led to my question. What exactly was my job? Uncle Ned stopped the metal fence just to his left. He reached out and let his fingers curl into the intertwined steel loops, and he gave a shake. Uncle Ned then turned and told me that he'd been having trouble with thieves jumping the fence at night and stealing copper parts from his cars. Things like radiators, brake tubes, and the alternator all have copper in them. And the market for copper was through the roof. It seemed Rascal's bark was worse than his bite, and Uncle Ned needed someone to act as a night watchman, someone making the rounds with a flashlight, so the copper poachers would think twice about breaking in. I suddenly had second thoughts. He assured me he didn't want me to play hero, although he thought of me as a bit of a slacker. I was still family, and his sister would have his scalp if anything happened to me. Uncle Ned felt that my near presence would keep the thieves out, and if anything did happen, I should call and he'd be there in a few minutes. Feeling a little more reassured, we kept along the fence when I noticed something strange. Every 20 yards or so, someone had used some wire to attach a small crucifix under the fence. I counted 3, and looking ahead, I spotted more. I had to ask my uncle about it. He told me the workers did it, weaving the crosses into the fence. Why? I asked, and Uncle Ned was quiet. His mood changed. He suddenly became agitated, evasive, and almost scared. I asked him again, "What's with the crosses?" He pointed to 4 cars at the far end of the junkyard. They were set apart from the others. There were two minivans and two small sedans. All of them had been in crashes, some worse than others. Our walk brought us right in the middle of them, and he seemed very nervous to be there. Uncle Ned told me that these were what his workers called the debtors' cars that were in fatal accidents. It seemed that once police were done with an accident investigation and the insurance company had settled all claims, the cars would end up here where they'd be stripped for parts. The problem was Uncle Ned's employees hated working on these vehicles. They felt it was like picking the jewelry off a corpse in a casket. His workers thought that nothing but bad karma came from working on these cars. There are also few incidents, he added. Incidents? What the hell do you mean by incidents? I said. I'd stopped walking. You know, that's a word that covers a lot of ground, Uncle Ned recounted. That a few of his workers had suffered their own accidents after working on the cars. And again, my uncle was being very vague. I wanted clear answers. Okay, how many workers? What kind of accidents? Uncle Ned explained that one of his workers was crushed under an old debtor a few months ago, and another had lost his hand after he accidentally sliced it open when pulling parts from another one. That's why the employees started putting the crucifixes on the fences. It was to keep the bad aura inside the junkyard. They didn't want anything following them home. My uncle thought his workers were being overly suspicious, but he allowed it. I glanced over at the four debtors. It suddenly felt like I was standing in a real graveyard. Each of these cars were giant metal tombs. I asked my uncle about them. How many people died in each car? What's their stories? I asked. He said he didn't know and didn't want to. Nothing would change if he knew any of the details of the accidents that brought the cars here to his job. Was to junk them, and that's what he did. His shuffling feet and gruff voice betrayed his uneasiness, though. I felt it, too. Something about that spot felt wrong. I noticed 3 of the 4 debtors weren't totaled. They didn't look like they'd been in any serious accident at all. They had pushed in panels, and one had a badly crushed roof, but nothing that screamed fatal. Though the one small blue sedan had its windshield pushed out with a hole in the middle of it, my imagination pictured someone's body thrown forward and their head smashing into the glass. I wondered if there were bits of hair still stuck in the shards. I shivered at the thought. The one car that looked like it was totaled into oblivion was a black minivan. It was mostly a crumpled hunk of steel, though the driver's side door was still attached and looked like it could be opened. The rest of the car was nothing more than folds of metal. For a moment, I thought the car had blood seeping out of it, but I realized it was just rust bleeding out from its undercarriage. Uncle Ned explained the final rule. This area, like the car crusher, was off limits. He spouted something about insurance issues with these cars, and there was no need for me to worry about this section of the junkyard when I made my nightly rounds, which was fine by me. It gave me the creeps. Uncle Ned walked back toward his office. The tour was done. I followed him, hanging a few steps behind. I heard this noise, a thumping sound, and I turned to look at the debtors. And for a split second, I thought I saw a young woman in the blue Mazda. Her blonde hair was matted, her face white, ice black. She was banging on the glass as if trying to get my attention. And just then Rascal barked and then let out a howl. And I turned to see the dog wailing and barking like he was warning me. When I glanced back at the Honda, the face on the car was gone. I shuffled to my uncle's side, very creeped out, but convinced I was letting all the talk of death get the best of me. Rascal stopped barking, which also brought things down a notch. I watched my uncle drive out through the gate, park his car, and walk back to the fence. He pulled his keys out, and then he officially locked me in for the night. He managed to wave and then left a trail of dust behind his car. As he drove away, when Rascal nudged up against me, I realized at least I wasn't totally alone. I made my way into the air-conditioned office, and I grabbed a scoop of dog food from the bag and I poured it into Rascal's bowl near my uncle's desk. He scarfed it down like he hadn't been fed in a week, although I felt like a jerk for doing it. I had to take Rascal out of the office so he could do his guard dog thing after dinner. It took some coaxing. I had to use another bowl of food to get him out the door. I noted the time. It was 7:30. I had another hour before sunset when I'd have to make my first rounds of the junkyard. I had my feet up, and I was playing some game on my phone when Rascal started to bark. It was throaty, guttural, and full of anger. I opened the door and I was hit with the heat. It was still very hot, even as the sun was about to dip below the horizon. I followed the sound of Rascal's barking, and in between his yelps, I heard voices. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it was at least two people yelling. I ran up along the right edge of the fence, and I found the dog facing the barrier and yapping up a storm. I let him know it was okay, and after a minute or so, he tired himself out and stopped. There was nobody in sight, but there was a blanket on the other side of the fence, and in the dust you could see footprints. It looked like someone was planning to climb the fence and throw the blanket over the barbed wire to get into the junkyard. I suddenly felt very protective of my uncle's place. I yelled out to the empty landscape on the other side of the fence. "I'm calling the cops." "I see you. You better give it up for the night." I stood there for a good 5 minutes, just staring, letting him know there was a new sheriff in town. Rascal gave up before me, turning to the office and shuffling his way back. Then I let out one more yell. "I'm here all night, every night." I decided that at least for the next hour or so, I should spend it on the office's small outside porch. There was a metal rocking chair for me to sit on, and as I rocked back and forth in the fading twilight with the old dog at my feet, I kind of did feel like one of those old sheriffs in an old western movie. I didn't take out my phone. I just sat there and watched as the day gave way to night, and then I heard the voices again. I was surprised that Rascal didn't let out a bark. Instead, he started to whine, and when I looked down at him, he seemed to curl into a tight ball, his tail tucking under his hind legs. I figured the thieves had come back to get their blanket, and they might try another break-in. I grabbed the flashlight my uncle gave me, and I marched back to the fence. I shone my light at the fence, and I yelled that the cops were coming, but the voices didn't stop. My flashlight found the blanket exactly where it had been when Rascal, and I saw it this late afternoon. And then I realized that the voices weren't coming from outside the junkyard, but from inside. Maybe they'd already jumped the fence. I spun around, letting the beam stretch across the junkyard, trying to find the voices, and my light settled on the debtors. The sound was coming from one of those cars. It was the green Chevy Cavalier, the one with the crushed-in roof. The tiny light was on inside the car's interior, and the voices were coming from it. As much as I didn't want to, I slowly walked towards the car. I then realized the voices were talking about sports, yapping about how the Nebraska football team was going to do that fall. It was a local radio show. The car's radio had somehow turned on. I fought against my fear. I mean, it's probably just as short in the circuit. Maybe a rat chewed up a wire under the hood. But what if it was the thieves and they were inside the car and pulling out the radio? I was about to dial my uncle's number, but I thought I should at least make sure. So I took a few more steps closer until I could get a good view inside the car, and there was no one in there. Without realizing it, I had walked all the way up to the green Chevy. The voices from the radio were now debating whether they had a quarterback that could lead them to the championship. I surveyed the inside of the car and double-checked there was nobody in there. I leaned in to get a good look through the back window and confirmed there wasn't a body hiding in the back seat or tucked under the dash. It was just me and the green Chevy. I reached for the driver's side door and I gave it a tuck. Sure enough, the dashboard was lit and the radio was on, and I sat down in the driver's seat, having to scrunch down because of the crushed roof. And then I reached over to the radio dial to turn it off, and that's when the car door slammed shut on its own. The flashlight dropped from my hand and it landed outside the car. I tried to push the door open, but it wouldn't budge. And I couldn't help but think of the blonde woman's face I thought I saw in the other debtor. Then I started to panic. I rammed my full body weight against the door, and it didn't move. I then reached across the passenger side and tried the door. Again, nothing. My hands reached out to the steering wheel. I grabbed it in frustration, shaking it and yelling. And as my palms held the wheel, everything went black. I was in this darkness, an ink black void. And then as quick as that happened, there was a light or lights, streetlights. I wasn't sitting in the junk car, but I was driving it along the road. The radio was on, the sports dudes were yapping again, but the players they were talking about were from 2 years ago. The streetlights were whipping by me, and I looked down at the speedometer and saw I was doing 110 miles per hour. Whoever was driving this car was a real speed demon. Suddenly, my right hand reached down and hit a button on the radio, changing the station from the talk radio guys to music. The song Free Bird came on, and the guitar was wailing. I felt my foot pressed down on the gas. A blur of the highway sign passed by. It was for the Hemlock Road exit on Route 88, and I knew where I was, heading east towards Lincoln. I felt the adrenaline rushing through my body. I wanted to keep feeling it. My hands gripped the leather wheel tighter. I let my glance shift from the road into the rearview mirror. But I didn't see myself. I was a 40-something-year-old man with a brown goatee, the driver of the Chevy, the driver that died. And just then a deer leaped out onto the road. I cranked all the way to the left to avoid hitting it, but the car's momentum caused it to keep going forward. I started to flip and then kept flipping. I counted 8 rollovers, and on the last spin, my skull hit the roof of the car, and I felt my neck crank. I heard it too, a loud snap. It made my head fall forward, dangling down. It was like a head on a rag doll, the neck bones and muscles just useless. My cheek rested on my chest, and I was looking at my shirt buttons. My eyelids fluttered, and then I let go of the wheel. I was back in the junkyard and sitting up in the Chevy. My hands went to my neck. It was all good, nothing broken. My heart was pumping, and every nerve in my body seemed electrified for a second. I thought about grabbing the wheel again, but questioned whether my body could take another round of what just happened. I was also scared, thinking that if I went back, maybe there was a chance that I didn't return. Instead, I reached for the car's door handle, gave it a push, and it opened. I was barely able to stand. When I looked out, I noticed that the sky was getting brighter. I pulled my phone from my pocket, and I saw that it was nearly dawn. What I thought took only a few moments had been hours. My uncle would be pulling up soon. I staggered back to the office, a rascal at my side. I plopped down into the rocking chair, and I tried to make sense of what happened, but I really couldn't. I figured I might have hit my head on the door jamb when I went to turn off the radio. Maybe I hallucinated the whole thing, but it was all too real. I knew it happened, and my uncle's car pulled up just then to the gate. I was still in a bit of a daze as I gave him the rundown of the night. I did let Uncle Ned know about the attempted break-in and walked over with him to where the blanket was still sitting outside the fence. He managed to give me a hearty pat on the back and let me know I was already a worthy hire. On my walk home that early morning, all I could think about as I shuffled along the highway was what happened in the car. The speeding Chevy was replayed over and over again. The combination of fear and thrills was still racing through me. I managed to get a few hours of sleep before my brother dropped me off at the juvenile detention center, so I could serve my community service, and I was distracted the whole day. I practically ran the mile from my house to my uncle's place that late afternoon, and just then a car came speeding down the highway way faster than usual. I stopped and watched it get closer. It was about a quarter-mile away, and it was hard to see exactly what kind of car it was, but the music blasting from the car radio made me stop and stare in disbelief. I heard that song Free Bird again, and it was the green car, the two-door Chevy, the deader from the night before. It drifted out of its lane, heading towards me. I could see the driver. It was the man with the goatee, his head upside down, and swinging from his broken neck like a pendulum. His eyes were on me, and he was smiling. I snapped out of the moment, and I ran for the junkyard's front gate. My feet slipped on the loose gravel. The music got louder. I didn't want to turn around. The car's wheels hit the gravel driveway. It was right behind me. I reached out and grabbed the fence, and the car was gone. I turned to see an empty driveway. There wasn't even a dust cloud. And just then my uncle stepped out. He yelled out a hello, and I half-heartedly gave him a wave while still trying to figure out what the hell just happened. My back was wet with sweat, and I struggled to catch my breath as Uncle Ned walked over to let me in. Of course, I couldn't tell him what just happened. No sane person would understand, you know. My uncle took off earlier than the night before, since he didn't have to go over the rules this time, the ones I had already broken. Even after what happened earlier on the road, I still kind of wanted to experience being in the deader again. The curiosity was overwhelming. I dragged the metal rocking chair over from the office porch, and I sat right in the middle of the creepy cars. Rascal didn't follow me. He still seemed uneasy about that section of the junkyard and stayed back at the office. I felt manic, and it made me anxious. I'd never been addicted to any drug in my life, but this was what a junkie must feel waiting for their next hit. I was trying to decide which car to go into next, and my eyes kept settling on the black minivan, the one that was almost totaled. For some reason, I felt that I had to wait until the sun went down, as if that was part of the ritual. Was this now my ritual? I looked over my shoulder. The sun looked like a tangerine about to roll off a table, and then it was gone. But it still wasn't dark, so I waited. The black minivan's door creaked open by itself. It had read my mind. Somehow these cars were now connected to my thoughts. I slid into the driver's seat. I had to wedge myself in. I sat there, and then the door closed by itself. There was a moment of doubt, a feeling that this was wrong, but the overwhelming desire to know about the other debtors, it overruled everything. My hands found the wheel. There was a flash of black, and then I was driving in the minivan. It was a rainy, wet afternoon. I looked over to the clock radio, and it blinked out at 3 p.m. Now I couldn't place the highway I was on this time. It was a big three-laner in both directions, probably one of the interstates. My eyes drifted down to the speedometer. It clocked a reasonable 65 miles per hour. The rain pelted the windshield. I clicked the windshield wipers up another notch, but it didn't do much to clear the glass. There was a boom of thunder, and then the highway lit up as lightning hit the ground nearby. I wanted to see who I was, so I glanced into the rearview mirror, and I saw a woman with red hair tucked under a baseball cap that read Princess on the front. Probably late 30s. I smiled to see if the woman would smile too. But then I saw something that made that smile disappear. In the rearview mirror, I not only saw the woman, but a big 18-wheeler flashing its lights to clear me out of the lane. No, I do not want to experience this. I tried letting go of the steering wheel, but I couldn't. It was as if my hands were welded onto the wheel. The car wasn't going to let me out. I tried closing my eyes, but I couldn't do that either. Suddenly, I wasn't waiting for some euphoric thrill ride experience. My arm muscles ached as I struggled to pull my hands free, and I saw the truck coming up fast behind me in the rearview mirror, but she or I didn't click on the blinker. She was one of those stubborn drivers who didn't want to switch lanes. The truck sped up. It was nearly on top of her or me. We were one of the same, and I screamed, hoping that I could somehow shock the driver into moving to do something to try and change what was about to happen. But I knew I couldn't. My view shifted from the rearview mirror to the windshield and through the haze of the water. I could see brake lights. Someone stopped ahead. My foot hit the brakes, slowing down, but the truck behind me didn't. It slammed into me with a force of 1,000 sledgehammers, ramming me into the stopped truck just ahead. Glass and bits of metal showered down on me. Airbags exploded, and then everything went black again. My hands released from the wheel. I fell out of the minivan, my face hitting the dirt. I scrambled on all fours from the car, and when I was about 20 feet away, I turned and watched as the door just closed. My legs felt like jelly as I staggered up back inside the office. I collapsed in a chair by Uncle Ned's desk. My fingers clicked off the switch of the air conditioner. I was already shivering. The next 5 hours were spent staring at myself in a mirror above a gray filing cabinet. The horrific crash of the minivan was replaying in my brain. My uncle's car, pulling up to the office, snapped me out of it. Uncle Ned asked if everything went all right as I blew past him towards the front gate. I shouted back that nothing happened and I'd see him later. And on the way home, I was on edge, my eyes scanning the road for either the green Chevy or the black minivan. Every oncoming car caused me to run off the shoulder and hide and wait for the vehicle to pass before I'd walk again. What should have been a 25-minute stroll took nearly an hour when I finally made it home. My mother wanted to know what was wrong. There was no hiding the pale shock on my face. I told her it was nothing, just the lack of sleep, and I let my bed swallow me up when I got to my room. The alarm woke me up. Somehow I was able to grab a few hours of sleep before I was to head out to my teaching job. My brother texted me that he was outside and ready to drive me to the center. I scarfed down a banana and was about to walk out the front door when I caught a view of our driveway. There was a black minivan sitting in it, the undamaged one I was driving the previous night. I stopped and went to the front bay window, and I peeked out through the blinds. My brother's car was on the street waiting for me. The minivan was in the driveway. I took a step back, blinked a few times, trying to clear away any insanity that might have crept into my mind. Before looking out the window again, I texted my brother, and I asked him if there was a van in our driveway. He texted back that I should stop messing around if I didn't want to be late. I stepped to the window and glanced out again. The red-haired woman had her face pressed to the window, her eyes black orbs as she stared at me. Just then I got another text message. It read, "We'll take you there." The phone dropped from my hands. There was the sound of another text, and I picked up the phone, terrified at what it might read. But it was only my brother giving me a final warning. I texted him that I wasn't feeling great and that I was going to miss doing my community service that day, and I heard him pull from the curb. When I looked out the front window, the van was gone too. I went back to bed, but I couldn't sleep. I got that urge again, the strange urge that I needed to sit in one of the debtors, and I can't explain it. But it was useless to fight that urge. Something was compelling me to go back to the junkyard. Some unseen force wanted me inside those cars. Why? I didn't know. The only thing I did know was that I couldn't fight that desire to be inside the debtors again. I didn't remember leaving my house and walking along the highway to my uncle's place. When he let me in at the gate, he was a bit touchy. My uncle wanted to know why the rocking chair was in the middle of the debtors. I just told him it wasn't me, which just made him angrier. I mean, it couldn't have been anyone else. Remember the rules, he said. I just shrugged it off, and I said I'd keep an eye out for thieves that night. Uncle Ned issued a final warning to do just what he was paying me for and nothing else. And then he was gone. I left a rascal on the office porch. He was curled up near the rocking chair, sitting on the dirt in the middle of the debtors. I set my sights on the blue Mazda, the car that had first caught my eye, the one with the ghostly woman's face that stared at me the first day. The door swung open. Then I heard Rascal whine. I lowered my head and I crouched into the blue car, the one with the hole in the windshield. The door closed with a loud bang. I looked around the interior. There was no real damage. The airbag had gone off and all the glass on the dashboard gauges were shattered, but otherwise the car didn't look like it was in a fatal accident. My hands rested on the steering wheel, and then my fingers crawled around it. A curtain of black rolled down all around me, and then I was driving in the dark. It was night time. I was on a back road. It could have been anywhere within 500 miles. There were no signs, buildings, or highway markers. It was a two-lane country RD, cutting across a patch of nowhere in particular. There weren't any streetlights. The only light was from one of my front headlights. I stared into the rearview mirror to see my face. It was the one I saw in the back window when I was walking away from the debtors the first day on the job. But this time it wasn't a corpse. Instead, I was a vibrant 20-something with blonde hair and pale blue eyes. A small stuffed unicorn hung from the mirror. The radio was on. The song was some country-sounding dude singing about lost love. There was no rain. I wasn't speeding. And for a moment, everything seemed just fine. And then the Mazda's headlights caught something up ahead on the right side of the road. There was a white car, a small coupe with its hood up. I felt myself touching on a brake, slowly pulling behind the broken-down vehicle. And then something strange happened, a new twist in the debtor experience. We both left the car. Now standing, we looked around, poked our head into the car. There was no one there. And then I heard the blonde driver scream out if anyone needed some help, and there was no reply. And then we took out our phone, took a picture of the car and its license plate. I was back behind the wheel, key in the ignition. We pulled away from the white car. She was about to snap in the seatbelt, but she took one last glimpse of the broken-down coupe in the rear-view mirror. But instead of a car, we saw someone sitting in the back seat, a man with a red ski mask on and wearing mirrored sunglasses. There was a scream, and then I felt a leather belt around my neck and pulled tight. I couldn't breathe. The stiff leather cut into my skin. I had to let go of the steering wheel to try to slip my fingers underneath the belt and gain some space to suck in some air. The car meandered on the road, drifting left and right. My legs kicked out, smashing into the dashboard. My heels cracked the glass on the gauges. My eyes found the rearview mirror again. I could see the ski-masked man with sunglasses leaning over the front seat. I saw a metal mile marker on the left side of the road, and with all my might, I stretched my foot to hit the accelerator, and I got my hand on the steering wheel. I gave it all the gas and sped to the sign. The ski-masked man released the belt and ducked behind the seats. Just as we crashed into the steel pole, the airbag exploded. And then his voice cut through, the sound of the last gasps of the blonde girl, and I heard him say, "I am the Red Mask of Death. Behold my presence." Everything went black for a moment, and then I was back in the junkyard. I gulped for air as I fell out of the car. I felt something wet on my forehead. My hand reached up, and when I pulled it back, it was covered with blood. My blood. My neck also felt like it had been squeezed in a noose. Okay, that was it. I was done. I wasn't just experiencing other people's deaths. I almost died this time. It was nearly dawn, and my uncle would be there soon, but I didn't care. I was officially quitting, and I wanted out of this junkyard now. I couldn't spend one more minute in this place. I marched over to the office, swung open the door, and started to ransack the room, looking for another key to get out. I rifled through the file cabinet, and then I pulled open every drawer on my uncle's desk. Laying in one of the drawers was a red ski mask, a leather belt, and mirrored shades, and the room started to spin. I stepped back. I would faint if I didn't sit down, and just then the office door swung open. Uncle Ned's gaze met mine, and then his eyes went to the desk in the open drawer. I backed up into a far corner of the office. Not a word was said between us, but he knew that I knew. My uncle reached down and grabbed the ski mask, and he pulled it over his head. He slid on the mirrored shades, and finally the belt was stretched out between both his hands as he stepped towards me. In the blink of an eye, Uncle Ned had transformed from an annoying relative to pure menace. He wasn't slumping and middle-aged anymore. Instead, he stood straight up, his shoulders back. He seemed big. His breathing seemed amplified, the huffing and puffing of a large animal, a predator. He kept coming forward, and he said, "I am the Red Mask of Death. Behold my presence." He snapped the belt in his hands. It sounded like a whip cracking. Rascal appeared in the doorway and whined. Uncle Ned turned for a moment to look at the dog. A distraction, meaning a chance for me. I bolted forward and I pushed past my uncle out of the door. I scrambled to the front gate, passing my uncle's car, and I reached it, but it was locked. I turned to see Uncle Ned stomping towards me. I tried to climb the fence, but I couldn't. A hand grabbed the back of my shirt and it threw me to the ground, and then the belt was looped around my neck. I was being dragged backwards, and I couldn't stop it. After about 30 yards of being pulled through the dirt, my uncle stopped, and I looked around and realized we were hit by the car crusher, and then a boot smashed into my ribs. I was almost unconscious. Through the haze, I saw my uncle open a trunk on one of the junk cars. Even though I was almost passed out, I knew what he was going to do, and I tried to stand, but I couldn't. Uncle Ned stepped toward me, the belt once again in his hand, and then he paused and turned to his right. He dropped the belt, and his hands went up in front of him, as if to stop something coming his way. The blue Mazda, the debtor car, smashed into my uncle, his body rolling over the hood and bouncing off the roof. He then fell with a thud on the ground about 20 feet away from me, and I heard him moan in pain. And then the forklift started up, even though there was no one behind the wheel. I watched as it drove over to Uncle Ned, and it slid its two forks under his body, and it lifted him up. He was dropped into the trunk of the car that was meant for me. I managed to stand up then, still just watching. The trunk shut, and then the forklift speared the car and took it to the crusher. I saw the car smash her as the walls closed in. I looked over to the Mazda. The young woman watched. As my uncle's car was slowly squeezed together, the four walls of the car crusher released to reveal the metal hunk that was now Uncle Ned's coffin. The forklift pulled it out of the machine, and it laid it on a pile of other metal hunks, ready to be recycled. It was done. The Mazda started up again. The blonde woman at the wheel nodded and drove back to her spot amongst the other debtors. After all the violence and noise, there was only silence. I stood for a moment, and then I realized that each of the cars I'd been in was leading me to this. The green Chevy wasn't trying to run me down. It just wanted to make sure I did go back to my uncle's place and get behind the wheel of one of the debtors. I just chose the wrong one. The black van in the text offering, "We'll take you there," was about making sure I did return since I'd chosen the wrong car again. They wanted me to learn the truth about my uncle. He'd killed, and he would kill again if he wasn't stopped. Somehow a living person had to acknowledge his evil deeds to complete his punishment. It seemed that the dead do communicate, at least in this junkyard. I looked over to the main gate, and I saw that it was now open. At this point, I didn't question it. I was just happy that it happened. I gave Rascal a final pat on the head, another bowl of water and food, and I started my long walk home. Later that afternoon, when I went back to work at my uncle's junkyard, pretending everything was okay, I reported that he wasn't around, that his car was there, that the office was ransacked, but there was no sign of Uncle Ned. For the next week, my uncle's disappearance was big news. The cops' theory was that he surprised some copper thieves, and he might have been killed and then buried in a shallow grave anywhere in the country. There was a funeral a month later, and my mom grieved for her little brother. And then, as it happens, things moved on. My parents actually ended up adopting Rascal, and I think he's much happier as a spoiled couch potato instead of a guard dog for a junkyard full of ghosts. As for me, I got a job at the local Applebee's working the overnight shift. On my first day, my manager pointed to the wall with the photos of past employees of the month, and I looked over at him, and the star for February, 7 months earlier, was a familiar face. It was the young woman who drove the blue Mazda. I could only hope that she's at peace now, and no longer driving along that dark, lonely RD. I spent the last hour Googling the name of my hometown. Nothing's there. All the local schools, all the local restaurants have just gone. Even my social media is messed up. I can't find any of my friends online. I can't find anyone. I'm actually kind of freaking out about it. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this before? Don't believe me? Well, try it yourself. Fallerton City High, gone. Fallerton Middle, gone. Fallerton Elementary School, gone. Fallerton City College, gone. That preschool behind the tire place and next to the McDonald's, which my mom took us to growing up. You get the idea. Everything's gone. Thousands of people, dozens of places. I can't find information for anybody. It's like we disappeared. I can't even reach the cops. I wish that were the only problem. My family and I woke up this morning to a total blackout. Every single house on the block lost power. That does tend to happen out here in the valley, often enough that my older brother Mark rigged his computer to get a connection via satellite. The two of us are currently crouched beside the generator, desperately trying to get a handle on the past few hours. My parents are panicking. They won't say why, but we have our suspicions. I saw something in the woods last night. Right before the power went out, when it was still dark outside, Mark woke me up and pulled me over to his bedroom window. He pointed frantically into the trees behind our house. It was raining. The mist made it difficult for my eyes to adjust, but after a moment, something big, and we only agreed on something big, darted towards the neighbor's back porch. A thick branch fell in its wake, and then somebody screamed. My parents rushed into the room right at that moment. I guess they heard the commotion and freaked. Mom told us to get away from the window. I gave in right away, because my parents can be scary when we don't listen. But Mark lingered there a little while longer. I didn't see what he saw. Mark whispered that he saw somebody running. He said it looked like they were running away from something. My father turned off the lights. I found that odd and pushed my brother aside. He looked out the window in silence. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he concluded nothing was there, just wind in the trees. Then the power went out. My parents have been acting very weird ever since. During the day, my mom tried to keep us in the kitchen. She made breakfast, lunch, and dinner over the fireplace. She even broke out a board game in the afternoon, and we played for a couple hours. She kept asking about schoolwork or football or baseball or anything but the odd situation we were in. We tried to change the subject, tried to ask her what was happening outside, but it was no use. She ignored our questions. My father, well, he had a wild look in his eyes. Mark and I can't recall anything like it. He kept rushing to check the window every few minutes. Then he would sit down to check his cell phone, then back to the window, then back to his phone like clockwork. Each rotation left him more agitated than the last. The cable didn't work. The internet had been spotty. There was really nothing to do but read a book or play a game. Mark asked me to go for a walk before dinner. I thought Mom might pop the temple out of her forehead. Nobody goes outside, she snapped. There could be live wires on the ground. Mark snorted at that. Watch your attitude, she barked. And keep the windows closed. I asked why, and she just stared at me with these deadly, fearful eyes that made me very uncomfortable. She looked like she wanted to tell me something, but my father answered instead. I didn't even realize he was listening. Nobody goes outside, he said. I returned to my book without argument. I found one of Mom's old Stephen King collections and stumbled onto a story about rats in a basement bigger than a man. Time moved a little faster while I read. The walls of my house started to evaporate. It didn't take long for my imagination to disappear down the stairwell in the story, plunging further into the darkness with each step. Listening to untold things move around me perilously through the blackness, somebody knocked on the door around 10 p.m. After an entire day of endless boredom, I thought this might be my salvation. Thank God. Maybe a maintenance worker, maybe a neighbor, maybe my friend from down the block. Finally convinced his mother to traverse the minefield of imaginary live wire. I got up from my chair to answer the door. My father sprinted across the room to block me. I don't think I'd ever seen him run before. He put his hand over my mouth. I tried to protest. He squeezed my arm. He didn't look angry. He looked scared. His eyes were on fire. It grew quiet outside, like someone was listening. One finger over his lips told me to shut up. I looked over to my mom and saw her doing the same thing to my brother. He looked like he wanted to cry. The knocking resumed. The pace was pleasant at first. You're typically formal, but friendly. Rat-tat-tap. Then a pause. A knock. I was confused. Why were they scared? Why would a burglar knock? I thought that this could be somebody who could tell us what was going on, and it annoyed me that my parents were paranoid. So I got the idea to try saying something anyway. Not my best thought. I started to speak, and my father grabbed me by the throat and pushed me against the wall. His sweaty palm slipped against my mouth. He raised one finger to his lips and held it there. The knocking continued. My brother whimpered in the corner. The door hinges whined from the pressure of the knocks. My father reached into his pocket with a hand that was formally placed around my neck. I knew he had a knife in there. And then, just as soon as it started, the knocking stopped. The house got quiet again. My father let go of me. It's been hours since the knocker left. My parents still won't talk to us. My mom's sleeping on the couch. My dad is sitting in front of the door with a gun across his lap. Can someone please tell us what's happening in Gallatin City? I still can't find anything online. We are available through message and comment as long as our connection holds. I don't think I'll sleep much tonight. It's too quiet. Do you know what happens when you search online for Gallatin City now? This post comes up. I'm not quite sure how to describe that feeling. We are a community of hundreds, thousands of people, each with countless stories and worries of our own. You are only hearing one of them now. I cannot understand how our digital footprint could disappear overnight, but here we are, day 2 in a missing city. I didn't get much sleep last night. Mark spent most of it glued to our bedroom window. He woke me and called me over every now and again. Sometimes he saw flashes of light in the distance. Sometimes he saw movement in the trees. Mostly we saw fog. Thick blankets of it descended on our house like a comforter. It also never stopped raining. Big gusts of wind thumped the house hard enough to make us jump. But the worst parts of the previous night were the periods of complete and total silence. Something about that quietness can really make you go crazy. In any given suburb, there are a million background noises at once, even in a storm, even at night. Birds should be chirping, insects should be buzzing. Car engines or motorcycles or air conditioners should all be gently humming in unison. But we didn't hear any of it. Not a single sound but our own. I couldn't stop thinking about the neighborhood dogs. Shouldn't they be barking? There was one in particular, a yappy little thing named Caesar, which never passed up a good opportunity to wake you up in favor of a scrambling squirrel or rabbit. Did our neighbors have time to get him inside? Did something else happen to them? What happened to Caesar? Mark woke me up for the final time around 5 o'clock. I tried and failed to shrug him off. I heard something in the street, he whispered. Let's go. I asked him what he heard. Clicking. He said he got up and walked towards the living room without another word. I didn't want to go. I was freaked out enough. I didn't and still don't need to add another messed up layer to this situation. Blissful ignorance is sometimes the best approach, but I got a gut feeling that this wasn't something that should be missed, and I didn't want Mark to be there alone for it. So I followed him. The hallway that leads to my living room passes by my parents' bedroom. We could hear my mother snoring. Softly on the other side, a baseball bat was propped up by her nightstand. Her cell phone was at the ready right beside it. We tiptoed past the creaking wood floor and arrived at the entrance to the kitchen. The clicking became clearer by that point. Mark pointed over to an alcove by the couch. I followed him to the corner. Then he stopped dead in his tracks. My father was sleeping with a gun in his hand. There was a window behind him that looked out into our entire living room. Staring through the other side was a giant black eyeball. We froze. I darted back and forth across the room. We were in plain sight, just standing there in the kitchen like a couple of jackasses, but for some reason the eye didn't seem to notice us. It passed by a couple times to focus on the toaster or something else. My father must have heard something. He stirred and rolled over. When he did, thankfully, we locked eyes. I put one finger to my lips. A sober understanding dawned on his face. He took the safety off his gun. The eye responded to the movement of the gun, and in one swift jolt disappeared from behind the window. Leaving a wake of leaves and scattered footsteps behind it, the air left my lungs. Something big ascended the wood steps to our porch. My dad turned to aim the gun. It started knocking. This time we didn't need anyone to tell us. We all stayed quiet. We sat in silence for the better part of the early morning. My mother awoke some hours later and got prepared to make breakfast, and only then did it feel safe enough to move around the house. Nobody told her what happened. I didn't think we needed to. My father certainly wasn't going to. I got the feeling from the look on his face that he would prefer not to talk at all for as long as he could. Mark returned to his spot by the window. Dad disappeared downstairs to get another box of ammo for his gun. I helped Mom cook over the fire, and we all went about our tasks in complete and total silence. No one tried to make fake conversation anymore. There wasn't any point in arguing about what was out there. We had enough food. We had enough water. Nobody was going anywhere. Just after noon, a knock came at the door. Each of us instantly stopped what we were doing. A sigh of relief went through the room when the familiar voice of our neighbor, Mr. Hallow, followed. He was looking for us. The door pounded harder. "No time to explain, please," he said. "Can you let us in?" My father walked in and stood awkwardly between my mother and the door. I could tell that he would prefer to ignore it, but she would never let him live it down. The true married man's dilemma. "Please, folks, if you're in there, open up. We don't have a lot of time," he said. Mark shook his head. "Please," he begged. "Jean is hurt. My mom bit her nails." Dad gave in and reluctantly looked through the peephole. Satisfied with his view of the other side, he slid the pistol into his back pocket, unlatched the lock, and opened the door. "Thank you," he said. "Now, Mr. Hallow is a big, burly guy. He took my father into his arms and slapped his back so hard the sound echoed down the hall. He moved over to chase my mother down for a kiss on the cheek as his wife and daughter trailed meekly behind. Thank you. Thank you. We didn't know if we'd see anyone else. My dad nodded awkwardly. My mom stepped up and hugged Mrs. Hallow tight. A quiet, pitiful moan escaped her lips as she did. The two of them were usually thick as thieves. My neighbor was a nice lady, the type that usually never shuts up, but now she couldn't get a word out. A thin line of blood trickled behind her foot. It didn't take long to notice the source. Her slacks were cut from the ankle to the knee. My dad slammed the door. "Come on, Jeannie," my mother said. "Let's get you cleaned up." The two of them walked hand in hand to the kitchen. Mr. Hallow sat down on her couch and wiped the sweat from his forehead and t-shirt. His daughter Alice perched herself neatly on the arm beside him. "Like I said, it's lucky we found somebody," he said. My father nodded again. "Did you see it?" Mark asked. "Whatever's out there, Mr. Hallow stared back at him. He took a second before he spoke, like he wanted to pick his words, which didn't quite fit a guy like him. "One of them got in the house," he said. "An open window downstairs. We trapped it in the basement." My father held up his hand. "Didn't feel safe staying there, though, Mr. Hallow continued. My father interrupted. "Enough," he whispered. "Take a break, Mike. Let's talk." Mr. Hallow nodded in bewilderment. He got up and shuffled after my father towards the dining room, leaving Mark and I with Alice. Alice Hallow is around my age. She's short, with dark hair and dark eyes. She has this awkwardly adorable round head that she covers up with a bow or pin or some other new accessory every other day. I've had a crush on her since grade school. I know that's probably not relevant, but I just want to point out what may later become obvious. Mark elbowed me in the ribs. I ignored it. "So, did you see anything?" I asked. "Like, did you see anybody out there?" She paused and then shook her head. "Well, what does it look like outside?" Mark asked. "Normal." "Quiet," she answered. "And you really didn't see anything?" I asked again. "When it started, She looked at me and shook her head, paused, then relented. "We were all inside, sleeping like you probably were. It was late. She started. Or early. I don't know. My dad was upstairs. I was upstairs. My mom doesn't sleep much, so she was doing some laundry in the basement," she continued. "I don't know what woke me up first. Her screaming or the power going out. They both seemed to happen at the same time. My dad started shouting her name. Jeannie, Jeannie. And my mom was just wailing from the basement. We both got to the kitchen and we could see her running up the steps. She was screaming at my dad. Close the door, close the door." But my dad couldn't stop looking at whatever was behind her. "He just froze," she said. "Right?" Mark whispered. I can't blame him. So I reach out and slam the door, and just as my mom makes it through, something wedges itself in the doorway, she continued. "Holy shit, what was it?" I asked. I don't know, something thick and sharp, like a claw, I guess. It was wet, too. It left a stain. Anyway, I couldn't get the door shut because of it. I was panicking. I kicked my dad in the shin, and he threw his body weight against the frame. The lock finally clicked, and we heard whatever it was fall down the stairs on the other side. She paused. "It didn't come up again," she said. My father reemerged from the dining room some moments after. Mr. Hallow trailed behind. "All right, who's ready to eat?" he asked. We ate our fire-cooked meal in relative silence. All four parents made it abundantly clear through menacing stares that the topic of the shit show outside would not be discussed with children present. Mark again asked if he could go for a walk. Nobody even dignified him with a response. After our dishes were done and disposed of, we retreated into various alcoves of our suddenly cramped three-bedroom. Mark and I went back to our room. Alice set up shop in the office with her mom. My mother retired to bed early, and both dads stood guard in the living room. The house grew quiet again. The wind and rain finally seemed to slow down. My Stephen King story kept me company. I couldn't help but empathize with a main character somewhere in between tales of rats and armor. Bat rats and albino rats who never saw the sun. Sleep came easily, and I was comfortable under the familiar warm sheets. I woke up to a rude shaking. Alice was standing over me. She didn't say anything. I guess she didn't have to. Mark and I rubbed the last remaining ounce of sleep out of our eyes and followed her wordlessly into the office. 2 cots were set up in the room. One looked disheveled, the other was still made. Alice pointed to the open window. Her mother was gone. My hometown is dying, and I don't want to die with it. I know it sounds ridiculous to be lamenting on an internet forum while the world is melting around me. At the moment, it definitely feels ridiculous. But you have to understand, if we don't survive, which we almost certainly won't, this story will be my town's last living record. That's important to me. That's important to them. I have to let someone know what happened here, even if it's only you. The truth is obvious now. We're being exterminated. This town and its people are being erased. Valentine City is all but wiped from the collective subconscious already. All that's remaining are the survivors, the creatures, in this story. I'll keep it going as long as they let me. I don't know why this is happening. I don't really care. Not anymore. I just want to get out of here. This will be the last post from inside my childhood home, the only home I've ever known. My brother and I have decided that we won't die here. Mark packed a couple essentials in our school backpack. The only thing that's remaining is this laptop and a frank conversation with my parents. I know they're scared. We're all scared, but we have to do something. Mrs. Hallow didn't come back last night. Alice only stopped crying long enough to tell the adults what she knew, which wasn't much. She fell asleep sometime around midnight. Her mother was in the room at the time. She was acting strange. She said. She just kept repeating the same things over and over. And her face was white. Like really, really white. I thought it was just a shock over what happened. The scratch, the attack. I didn't know. I didn't know. Mr. Hallow was inconsolable. We have to find her, Jack, me, you, and the boys. Alice can come too, if she's up to it. We got weapons. Don't wait. You got a small arsenal here, Richardson. They're big, but the damn things are stupid enough. My father just shook his head, pursed his lips. I'm not going to risk my family's safety, Dad insisted. Especially not at night. Mr. Hallow's already red-faced turned a shade of scarlet. He looked like he might blow a gasket. Then he calmed himself and delivered the next bit like a sermon. Fine. You stay inside and cower. Lie to your kids. Keep them underneath the covers long enough, and maybe they won't think there's monsters outside. But you raise your family how you want. Asshole, but don't you dare tell me how to take care of mine. Mark looked down at his feet. I avoided my father's glance. Alice, come on, we're going, mister. Hallow said, get what you got. We're not staying, mister. Hallow finished. You're not convincing me to abandon my wife out there. You know me better than that, Jack. My father reached out and handed him a gun. We have extra, he said. You'll need it more. Mister. Hallow nodded awkwardly. He took the pistol and stuffed it into an oversized coat pocket before turning and heading for the door. My mom met him there with some bread and other things stuffed into a plastic bag. There wasn't much, but I think she felt like she had to do something. And she looked like she wanted to say more, but she didn't. Alice reached out and gave me a warm hug. She held on longer than expected, right around that time. I really wish she would stay. Not just because of my feelings for her, but because I think we all knew what would happen next. It all just happened so fast. Thank you for the hospitality, she said. Mister. Hallow shook each of our hands one last time. My father opened the door for him. Without another word, the pair descended the front porch into a thick evening fog. Alice turned back to wave. She turned around and they were gone. My father shut the door. Dad shuffled back to the couch and collapsed. Mom waited at the door like they might change their minds. Mark perched at the window. He looked over and shook his head at me. Just as an all too familiar clicking echoed down the block, I could feel my body instinctively tensing. I had no true preparation for what came next. The sound started quietly before it seemed to fill the air. Soon it was as if 1,000 crickets suddenly invaded Folleton and all decided to chirp at the same time. The ringing, awful cacophony of it was deafening. Somebody outside screamed. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman. The chirping erupted even louder and seemed to devour their voice. My father held his head in his hands. He motioned for us to block our ears. My mother started to cry underneath the clicking, underneath the screams. One word became clearer as it repeated over and over again. "Jeannie," the man screamed. The gun went off soon after. One shot at first, then 2, 3, 4 in quick succession. Somebody else started screaming, and I knew that had to be Alice. The pain behind that scream made my stomach turn. The gun went off one more time. The clicking dissipated, the screams stopped, and then it was quiet again. My father got up and quietly led my brother away from the window. Mom fell to a heap in front of the couch. I could feel the tears forming in the corner of my eyes, and I tried to fight him back. "You knew that would happen," I told my dad. "Why did you let her go?" He stared back at me. Heavy footsteps echoed on the porch. The knocking started. My mother couldn't control her sobs. My father dropped onto the floor to silence her. It was no use. The two of them ended up in this awkward wrestling embrace. The pounding outside continued. "We killed them," Mark whimpered. "And now they're going to kill us." The footsteps left the porch and circled the house. We heard knocking from my bedroom window, then the office window. "They're checking for weaknesses," Mark whispered. "They're trying to find a way." The sound ascended to the roof. Heavy footsteps paced back and forth above us. The chimney kicked back smoke. "It's too small," my father said. "They can't fit." Please God, they can't fit. My mother wrapped her arms around her head. The knocking surrounded us. There had to be a dozen of them, all checking various points of entering, all clicking their disturbingly loud song in unison. Staying quiet would be no use now. They had to know we were inside. Mark gestured for me to look through the peephole. I squinted, and I noticed something in the distance. It was still dark, but the sun started to rise on the horizon, and with it came a few tentative beads of light which softly illuminated the neighborhood. I realized I was staring at the home of Yappy Caesar, and standing in front of it was something I hoped to never see again. The creature stood, at least 2 to 3 times the height of a man. It held itself up on 2 massive legs that bent wildly at the knee, and behind it were smaller legs that trailed behind sort of uselessly. I thought at the time that they looked like fins. One of the bent legs reached out to my neighbor's glass. It started knocking. There was a moment's pause. Their window opened. I had to fight my instincts as a woman leaned outside as if to greet the creature, which gently took her into its hind legs and rambled down the hill. The unrelenting clicking soon gave way to the scurrying of heavy footsteps. A massive weight lifted itself off our roof. The sun came up. We were alone again. "We have to leave today. We can't take no for an answer. We have no choice. These things, they know we're here. They will get inside tonight. If I don't make it, you know what happened. But please wish me luck. I feel better knowing that some trace of my town will live on in this forum." I can hardly describe driving through the complete devastation of my hometown. We passed dozens of familiar homes from over the years. Some of them had bullet holes. Some had bent frames or broken glass. Some had dead bodies in their front yards. And I try not to look at those too long, because I knew the faces. But it's hard to stop yourself from looking once you start. You know, I saw Alice. I saw Mr. Hello. I saw neighbors. I saw friends. Some of them died running, some died fighting. But they all seemed to end up the same way, in scattered bits and pieces, cast like trash, almost decorating their own immaculately made front lawns. My father drove the car. Only one RD. Let us out of town, but it passed through a few hiccups along the way. The supermarket on Grannis T sat behind 2 apartment complexes that tended to be crowded. The gas station on Main would allow us to fill up, but they didn't call it Main for nothing, and more people would almost certainly lead to more problems. All of these issues swirled around my head in unison, with a backdrop of my entire town carved up like origamis right in front of my face. And my dad didn't even seem fazed by it. He actually hummed for the October 1st minutes of the trip. My dad is not the type to hum at first. I thought it might be a nervous thing, but then my mother started to join him. Guys, I called out. Mark glued himself to the car window. He wouldn't look at me, not even a shared glance of misery. I knew from his reaction that something bad was about to happen. I guess I just didn't want to admit it to myself. I said. My father slowed down around the grocery store. He pulled into the lot unceremoniously, as if it were any other Tuesday, while the corpses of our neighbors lined the streets among us, clearly baking in the heat of the rising sun. I actually thought we hit one of them. What were we doing? I asked. Nobody answered me. Hello. I tried again. My father parked the car. He leaned over to give my mom a peck on the forehead. She nodded and smiled back. After a moment of silence, he gingerly unclipped the seat belt and moved to get out. Nobody bothered to stop him. I said, "Wait, are you serious? You can't go out there." He smiled at me one last time. Looking back, I like to think there was still some part of my dad in that smile. He looked like a weight had just been lifted from his shoulders, like he got us this far, like his job was done. I didn't understand it then. I do now. I only saw the scratch when he got up right above the bell, hip to hip. His shirt had always been tucked. My mother took a deep breath. "Mom, I beg." "Mom, no, please." She looked back at me and took my hand. She was cold to the touch. Mark whimpered something. I knew then that my brother knew all along. It happened the first night, he whispered. "They can't fight it anymore, Maddie. It won't let them." The car door opened. "Mom, no, you can't go out there." She pulled her hand away. "Mom, please." "It's okay, honey," she said dreamily. "It's okay, honey. It's okay, honey." She got out of the car and sprinted after my father. I never saw my mother sprint before. She looked so strange doing it. I watched the two of them go towards the store, hand in hand. In a moment they were there, and the next they were gone. "We have to follow them," I begged. "Okay," he whispered. "But be ready to run when I say run, deal." There was a loud noise then. "I'm the oldest," he insisted. "We don't know what we're going to see inside there. You have to listen to me." "Shut up and let's go," I said. We hopped out of the car and ran across the empty lot. Rain and heavy wind swooped in with our arrival. Mark slipped in a pool of blood. I raced back to help him. By the time we both made it inside, our parents were gone. We looked around for a minute. The store seemed to be shelled. Overturned shelves made it difficult to get around. Smeared floors made the entire place stink worse than a slaughterhouse. At the center of the store was a staircase that leads to the basement level. Normally larger items like water jugs are stored down there. We got the distinct feeling that we weren't totally alone. Because we could hear some kind of movement in that area, we moved toward it. Mark found some cover behind a blown-out register. We used it to peek down the staircase. An enormous pit sat below us. We couldn't actually see where it ended. Mark picked up a can and dropped it 10 to 15 seconds later. It made contact with the bottom. The closer we inched towards the center, the more that movement seemed rhythmic, almost pulsing like a heartbeat. We heard footsteps. Mark ripped my collar and pulled me back. Approaching the center of the store were a man and woman who both looked familiar to me from different places. That was my first thought. That they must be together without me realizing. And it really is a small city after all. The couple walked up casually to the edge of the pit. They looked at each other and smiled. Then they jumped hand in hand, as if expecting to land in a ball pit. The splat came after the boom sound. The store grew quiet. Something seemed to be slurping down below. "What the hell?" Mark whispered. "You don't think?" "It drinks the blood," I interrupted. Suddenly, the pulsing grew louder. Horrible scraping ripped somewhere below it. I can't adequately describe this sound. Almost like a giant moth breaking its way out of a cocoon. A familiar rhythm took over. That knocking rhythm checking for weaknesses, Mark muttered. Even at birth, we have to go. Mark said. Yes, we do, I replied. Each of us put in our best track performances to date, and the building gave way as if an earthquake were underneath it. We skidded out of the front entrance just as the overhang dipped down to smash the carousel door. My brother got to the car before me. He jumped into the driver's seat, and thank God the keys were still in the ignition. He smashed the gas and all but left me with a passenger door popped open. I hopped in at the last possible moment. The store collapsed behind me. Now Mark doesn't know shit about driving, and neither do I, but any idiot can hit the gas and steer away from an explosion. We picked up speed while debris rocked the car. Just as we got back on the road, Mark pointed into the rear view, and I wish he didn't. Standing in the wake of the grocery store was a creature 3 times its size. I didn't look at it twice. We managed to drive to the gas station before nightfall. We found it pretty much untouched. I don't think anybody else made it that far. We took the mountain road into the next town, and we drove past sundown. We're safe and sound now in a place called White Valley. The people here are friendly, but none of them, including the sheriff, could tell me a damn thing about Folleton or what happened to it the past few days. Go figure. I hope more than anything that my post can help drive more survivors out of the woodwork. Please message me if you or someone you know lived through the attack on Folleton City. I can't overstress the importance of that. We can't let our town just be forgotten. One day we will go back. I don't care if it's just Mark and me. I know we can find the entrance the same way we found the exit. We don't expect to find anyone alive. That's just hope that's not worth having. But we all have a right to know what's living there instead. Signing off for now, Matt. How do you prove a murder with no body? Even worse, how can you sleep at night knowing whatever took them is still out there? You can never stop being a detective. It's the kind of career that changes the way your mind works. Once you've started to think like one, the switch never really goes off. You start down a path and you can't go back. Not that I would. Even if I could. Personally, I've had a very interesting career as a detective, both during my years in the police force and in the years since I left to start my own firm as a private investigator. It's funny. I actually left the police service to take on less stressful cases. In fact, I almost expected it to be boring. I used to work in homicide, and while it can be rewarding work, there is a mental toll to it. I like to claim to have some faith in humanity, but it's hard to do that when you have seen the worst of it day in and day out. As a private investigator, I don't see nearly as much carnage during my work, but it was anything but boring last year. I spent 2 hours being interrogated by American Secret Service agents because an adulterer I'd been trailing just so happened to be staying in the same hotel as a U.S. ambassador. They found my parked car suspicious. I suppose part of the reason they even noticed it is because my car tends to stand out. It's a red 1957 BMW 503 coupe. Subtle. No, perhaps not. I have swapped it out for my wife's vehicle when necessary. Her Toyota is far less conspicuous, but a man should be permitted some vices, and my car is mine. A few years before that, I actually pressed charges against a gentleman after he opened fire on my car, causing considerable damage to the body. He had correctly guessed I'd been hired to look into the suspicious arson of a business he owned. Now, one would think that the insurance fraud charges that would likely follow my investigation would be less severe than the murder charges he would have faced had he successfully killed me, or the attempted murder charges and a property damage lawsuit I charge him with. But I digress. My work does remain exciting, and my psychiatrist has thanked me for switching to a less stressful career. But I must admit that some days I do work missing homicide. I don't miss the bodies or the carnage. No, I miss the feeling of accomplishment, the sense that I'd done something good for some poor, unfortunate strangers by granting the dead some justice and the living some peace. I suspect that was why I accepted the job from Gemma Shaw. Out of some good sense of twisted nostalgia for the good old days, had I known then what would happen, I'm not sure I would have. Would I have chased her out of my office like a stray cat? Or would I have accepted anyway? Would I have accepted, knowing that the mysterious fate of Richard Shannon would keep me up at night for what may well be the rest of my life? I don't know. I really don't know. Gemma Shaw was past 30, but she had aged gracefully and barely looked a day over 21. She had long brown hair, delicate features, and a charming, innocent smile. When the knock on my door came, I was at my desk. I was closing out a report I was going to email to a client regarding an insurance fraud case. Nothing too interesting. "Come in," I said without looking up from my laptop. Shaw entered quietly, as if she was afraid of disturbing me. "Sorry to bother you," she said quietly. "Mr. Moore, right?" "I am," I replied, looking over at her as I closed out my report. "And what can I do for you, Miss Shaw?" "Gemma Shaw," she said. "Okay, Miss Gemma Shaw," I repeated, getting up and offering her a hand and a reassuring smile. It seemed to put her a little more at ease as I guided her to a seat. "So what brings it to my doorstep?" "My father," she began. "Trevor Shaw. He passed away around 2 years ago." "I'm sorry for your loss then," I said. "What was the cause of his death?" "Officially suicide, but I've had some doubts about that for some time." "Oh, my father wasn't the sort of man to take his own life, Mr. Moore. I believe that there was more to his death." "Oh, I see, Miss Shaw. If you have suspicions or evidence suggesting foul play, I'd recommend you bring it to the police, not to me. I don't typically take on homicide investigations anymore." "Yes, I've already brought my suspicions to them," she said. "I brought them up during the initial investigation after his death. They still deemed it." "Okay, so why are you here 2 years later?" I asked. On cue, she produced a folder from her coat. "I have some friends in the police department. They don't usually make a habit of passing things like this along to me, but given the circumstances, they thought it was necessary." She offered me the folder, and I looked through it. It contained several photocopied pages of some sort of notebook, a list of names and dates. One of those names was Trevor Shaw. Scans from the ledger of one Mr. Damien Scott, she said. "Have you heard of him in the news?" Damien Scott. The name did sound familiar. He'd been employed by the Morrow crime syndicate. It was based out of London. From what I'd heard, he was the lab dog of their current head, a gentleman with a rather unpleasant reputation by the name of Jack Morrow. When Morrow or one of his mates wanted a man dead, Scott was allegedly the one they sent. No one knew how he operated. By all accounts, the man was some sort of murderous genius. For every kill, he seemed to have some sort of perfect alibi. It had caught him. It is very difficult. From what I heard, they'd technically only gotten him on money laundering and were trying to build up from there. Unsurprisingly, they hadn't gotten far with him. Now, supposedly, he conveniently hung himself in prison, although a few of my old mates still on the force had mentioned that he'd still left behind quite a treasure trove of information. Ledgers on victims the Morrow family had paid him to kill. Now, by itself, it wasn't damning evidence, but it opened up a few doors that Morrow would probably have preferred to remain closed. Doors like Trevor Shaw. "Interesting," I said softly, staring down at the name on the ledger before closing the folder. "You've brought this to the police?" I asked. "My father's death was a closed case. They're prioritizing the ones that are still open, the ones they didn't solve," Gemma said. "But I always knew that his death wasn't a suicide. And as far as I'm concerned, this proves it. I just might admit it. Scott was a hired killer. Say, he did murder your father. He likely did it on Jack Morrow's orders. My father had no connections to Morrow," Gemma said. "You're sure of that?" "Yes, I'm positive." "Then why would he be murdered by Morrow's pet hitman?" "Because one of the men he worked with did. My father owned a construction company. After he passed away, one of his partners, Richard Shannon, took over. I know that Shannon has ties to Jack Morrow. I just can't prove it," she said. "And this is where I come in, isn't it?" I asked. She nodded. "Yes, if you can prove Shannon is connected to Morrow, maybe it would be enough to get someone to reopen my father's case. Please, I know that man paid to have my father murdered. He's gotten away with it for too long. He can't keep getting away with it. Please, mister." More, I don't know who else to turn to. She stared at me, pleading with her big brown eyes, and I knew that she was desperate. And maybe it was that look that finally sold me. As I said before, I'd put my days in homicide investigations behind me, but I'd seen that look on her face before. She wasn't the first person to plead with me to grant them closure. Odds are she wouldn't be the last either. All right, if there's a connection between him and Morrow, I'll find it. I promised. And the look of relief on her face, it defied expression. Thank you, mister. More, she said, and that tone in her voice reminded me of the good old days, the days where I could give closure to those who were left behind. There's a useful little four-letter word I use in my line of business often, and Richard Shannon was full of it. As I started to dig into the man, it became immediately clear to me that he was an insufferable prick. Before I even set eyes on him in person, I did some snooping online. I don't personally partake in social media, but it does make my job much easier. You can learn a lot about a person through what they post online, and Shannon could barely go an hour without posting. He was a greasy-looking man with a graying goatee and a cowlick, who seemed to fancy himself as some sort of business influencer. His LinkedIn profile described him as Prometheus, igniter of the human renaissance, entrepreneur, advisor, analyst, engineer, investor, success coach, futurist, disruptor. And I suppose, in a way, his little biography told me everything I needed to know about the guy. Although maybe not in the way he anticipated, most of what he shared came down to typed sermons on how to succeed in business. Unfortunately, almost all of it came across as soulless, socially incompetent madness. The 3 most recent posts he'd made read as follows. I'm just going to say it. Yes, you should be putting your business over your family. Your business provides for your family. There's countless people out there who will share tear-jerking posts about how you'll regret missing out on moments and milestones. But the harsh reality is that building a foundation for your children's future requires sacrifice. If you will not sacrifice your family for your family, they will not thrive. My son Taylor understands that I might not be there for every moment, but he's why I'm grinding for that future. So put the business first. Your kids will thank you for it. Do you agree? That was one post. Another rant followed shortly after. Now I understand which employees are assets and which are liabilities. The employee's job is to serve the company, not the other way around. I let go of a gentleman who spent 5 years working for me today after he broke the news that his wife was pregnant. Can you believe that? I let him go because I knew that he would no longer prioritize the business over his family. He lacked hunger, man. He lacked the hunger required for success. Now you listen to me, and you listen well. If an employee is no longer an asset, then they are a liability. Absolutely. Period. DM me to learn more. That one was great. And then there was one below, posted a day before. Okay, I'm just going to say it. If you're making under 80 grand a year, you are not in a position to start a family. Your salary, it is a clear indication of your worth. If it is low, then you are not in a position to have children, period. You are simply setting yourself up for deeper failure. There is no case for argument here. So yeah, this guy was nuts. Completely nuts. And yet his modest amount of followers, they all seemed to just gobble it up. They praised him as though he was some kind of corporate King Solomon. He spoke of hustling and grinding, as though he was some sort of top-floor executive, someone who could change the fate of society with just a phone call, as opposed to a small man who suspiciously inherited a relatively unremarkable company. All hat and no cattle, a friend of mine sometimes says. Now, I rarely feel much of anything for the people I'm asked to investigate, but I will admit that I did feel a profound dislike for Richard Shannon. Fortunately for me, ego often goes hand in hand with incompetence. I imagine that Shannon would prove to be no exception. Now, I imagine that a man like Shannon might keep his secrets in one of 2 places, his home office or his company office. The company office seemed to be the logical place to start, and I'd have an easier time getting in there without a warrant. Shannon worked in his office from 11 to 7 o'clock Tuesday to Friday. He was not the first to arrive, but he was indeed the last to leave. I spent a few days trailing him at a distance to get a feel for his schedule, and once I'd figured out his routine, I made my move. Now, in the interest of transparency here, I will admit that some may call what I did breaking and entering. Lockpicking just so happens to be one of my many little skills I've picked up, but if asked, I will tell a judge the door just happened to be unlocked. Either way, I found myself alone in Shannon's office, and I wasted no time looking around. I started with his desk, looking through any papers he'd left out, but none of them were relevant to my investigation. So I moved on to his laptop. As I said, ego often goes hand in hand with incompetence. A startling number of people leave their phones and laptops unlocked, and many use piss-poor passwords that are fairly easy to guess. Shannon wasn't stupid enough for the former camp, but he was stupid enough for the latter. This idiot had even left himself a hint, as if there was any way he could forget this password. The little pop-up window onto the password bar appeared with the words hint. Why grind? My first guess. Future didn't log me in, but my second did. Taylor, I typed in. Well, at least he was a little sentimental. I wasted no time in opening up my emails. Like the papers on the desk, most of them weren't relevant to my investigation. But given the amount of personal correspondence he'd used his professional email for, I had little doubt that what I was looking for would be in there. Despite my focus on his laptop, the sound of footsteps outside of the office didn't escape my notice. I froze, looking up to see a figure out in the hall. Instinctively, my hand dropped my gun, but that instinct quickly faded the moment I saw who it was. Well, hope you don't mind my joining you. The door was unlocked. I almost laughed as he walked into the room as if he owned the place. Neil Rutland, I said. Are you following my trail again? Well, a cherry red BMW is difficult to miss. You know, Rutland said, you really ought to upgrade to something more subtle. Well, what's the point in owning a classic if you don't drive it? I asked. What indeed? He shrugged. He rounded Shannon's desk to see what I was reading, and I did nothing to stop him. Neil Rutland was a man I'd known for decades. During my days in homicide, he'd been my partner, and I spent a good portion of my career working alongside him. He was one of the few men I trusted with my life. Rutland was a charming man with a low voice and a mild hint of a Scottish accent. He wore his hair in a bit of a comb over to hide his receding hairline, and he had intense, focused eyes despite his charm and the warmth he radiated. He'd always been the less friendly one between us, which suited me just fine. He left homicide shortly before I had. Although he hadn't left the force, he'd simply moved on to the fraud cases. Interesting running into you here, I noted, watching as Rutland stared down at the laptop. I take it this isn't a coincidence. Yes and no. Rutland admitted. I imagine you're aware that the former owner of this particular company was named in the ledger of one Mr. Damien Scott, correct? I am well aware, I began. Trevor Shaw. A suicide, though his daughter doesn't believe it. That's who hired you then? Rutland asked. I didn't confirm it, but my silence said enough. So what brings you here? I asked. A favor to a friend working in organized crime. They don't have the resources to investigate every name in that ledger, but he had some suspicions about our friend, Mr. Shannon. You're looking for ties to the Moreau Syndicate? I asked. Well, whatever I can find, he said. You're after the same, aren't you? And you were kind enough to open the door for me. And you were kind enough to ask for my assistance on this matter of mutual interest, I said. Rutland laughed. Yes, I suppose I was. We both looked down at the laptop. What have you found so far? I asked. Well, aside from being positively mental, Shannon seems clean. Divorced. Lives alone. Rarely goes out. Well, a man like that wouldn't likely be the center of attention in an operation like Morrow's, I said. Rutland stepped aside to let me finish. He focused his energy on a nearby filing cabinet. Maybe not, but he might know who would be. Now, your client, she wants evidence that her father's death is a syndicate hit, doesn't she? Enough to reopen the case. Correct, I said. Okay, well, say you found it. You'd make damn fine witnesses against Mr. Shannon. How much pressure do you think a man like him would need before he cracked? Oh, him. Not much, I said. Especially if you find just the right. I paused, staring at something down on the screen. An email I'd been looking for. I read over it before calling over Rutland. Hey, take a look at this. Rutland looked away from the folders he'd been going through before coming to read the email over my shoulder. It had been sent from an email address that seemed to belong to the late Mr. Scott. It reads as follows. Shannon, you got a chance to do the right thing. One payment. Our business is concluded. You can have a fresh start somewhere else. Well, how ominous, Rutland said as I put the email Scott had used into the search bar, and it brought up a whole series of buried emails, each one from the same address. I clicked into the next one. This is what it said. Shannon, not accusing you of anything, but numbers don't lie. Jack doesn't like it when people get greedy. We don't want to think the worst of you. Check your budget for 192 Gordon Street again, please. Rutland read over the email with narrowed eyes before turning and heading back to the file cabinet. 192 Gordon Street, he murmured before taking out a folder and... Apartments have been under construction since 2017, completed last month. Really quite a long construction, isn't it? I asked, looking over as Rutland examined the folder. He huffed in amusement. 2 fires destroying everything and resetting it back to zero. 200 plus 200 people on payroll. High salaries, consultant fees, supply invoices. Somebody pulled these numbers out of their arse money laundering? I asked. Most likely. Although I can't imagine every name on payroll was on site putting in work either. I'll need to go over this in detail. You may not have time, I said. Looks like Morrow suspected Shannon was taking more than his share. Whoever just arrested Scott might have just done our man a favor in keeping his name out of that hit list. But I doubt Morrow will be inclined to forgive and forget. Well, that's not usually how he does business, Rutland admitted. Even with Scott gone, our man Shannon must be watching every shadow right now. Yeah, and a man that's scared might be looking for some new friends, I suggested. Rutland nodded slowly. Yes, he just might be. What do you say, you and I introduce ourselves? The Headmaster's Steakhouse. It was one of the more upscale spots in town. I dined there on a few special occasions, although it really wouldn't have been my first choice. Upscale and good were not necessarily mutually exclusive terms. The food wasn't bad, not by any means, but the place had what I could only describe as a pretentious atmosphere. That said, I suppose I wanted to impress clients. And had my head lodged up my own arse, it might just be the place I would have taken them. According to Richard Shannon's calendar, he was scheduled to be dining with a client at 8 p.m. at the Headmaster. I do wonder if we might have done that client a favor by interrupting. Shannon sat at his table, talking loudly. He was eating a lobster and shooting back an expensive bottle of champagne like it was cheap liquor. He looked already drunk. As we sat at a nearby table, Rutland regarded him with disgust. His client didn't seem to think much better of him. He left shortly after. Richard Shannon, Rutland asked. I let him take the lead. Oh yeah, his words were slurred. My name is Detective Neil Rutland, and this is my dear friend, Detective Simon Moore. May we sit down? Rutland didn't wait for an answer. He just sat down across from Shannon, as if he'd been invited. My apologies for interrupting your wonderful dinner here, but this really couldn't wait, Rutland said. I'm sure you understand, considering the borrowed time you're living on. Oh, but don't get me wrong, this is a lovely way to spend it. Fine food, fine champagne, Dame Perignon. Fantastic. What can I help you gentlemen with? Shannon interrupted. His words were still slurred. Oh, I don't believe you can help us, Rutland said, but we may be able to help you. Shannon just continued to watch us as Rutland continued. Jack Morrow is a dangerous man to have as an enemy. I'm not here to make any insinuations about your honesty or moral character, but Morrow, well, it seems he's already made up his mind about you, hasn't he? Your point, Shannon said. Well, my point is, in your shoes, most men might be a tad bit nervous. I certainly would be. Even with Dammy and Scott out of the picture, I really can't imagine you've got much time left. Those affairs are my business, not yours, Shannon said. Oh, I disagree. I think they are, Rutland said. Let me make this clear, Mr. Shannon. From where I'm sitting right now, I can see a man in over his head about to drown. Luckily, I can help." Shannon cracked a dry smile then. "Oh yeah, you must be the ones who were poking around my office last night. Whatever help you think you can offer me, I don't want it," he said. "You may come to regret that statement," Rutland replied. "Say you do make it out of this Morrow situation with your life, you do realize. With what we found in your office, you're likely to go down with him, right?" "The Morrow goes down," Shannon said. "If it was my turn to chime in, I would have thought a man in your position would be eager to see Morrow go down." "Maybe," Shannon said, "but not to the likes of you. Let me put it this way, detectives. I've got the morning situation under control. So unless you've got enough to arrest me right here and now, there's really nothing for us to talk about." "You got me." "You don't strike me as a man in control," I said. "Then you don't know me. Is there anything else, detectives, or are we done here?" Rutland narrowed his eyes at him before looking over at me. Neither of us had much more to say. "Goodbye, gentlemen," Shannon said. Rutland stood up and fixed his suit jacket. "Goodbye, Mr. Shannon," he said, and then turned to leave. I took one last look at Shannon before following. "The man's either a damn fool or about to do something damn foolish," Rutland murmured as we laughed. "Not much of a line between arrogance and idiocy, is there?" I agreed. "My gut says arrogance." "Mine, too. Normally I'd wait for a funeral, but he's more valuable to us alive," Rutland interrupted. As we stepped outside, he went for his cigarette. I lit it. "I'll watch him, all right?" I promised. "Yeah, track his movements. See if anyone else is keeping an eye on him," Rutland said. "That would be best. But use your wife's car, will ya?" I suppose it wasn't surprising that Richard Shannon lived in a fairly nice house. Even without his ties to the Morrow Syndicate, I would have expected him to live comfortably. He lived in a 2-story Mediterranean-style house with a balcony over the second floor, a house worth a few million easily. He lived alone. He left only for work, and rarely returned later than 8 p.m. He didn't go out otherwise. Even on the weekend, he remained secluded in his home, blinds and curtains drawn, as if he were afraid of anyone peeking inside. Had I not seen how arrogant he was the other day, I might have thought he was a completely different man than the one I met at the steakhouse. Rutland and I took shifts watching Shannon. He would watch him during the day. I would watch him during the evenings. Like Rutland had asked, I had switched up the vehicles I used. I used my wife's car and even a couple of rentals on occasion. I never parked in the same spot either. Rutland had asked me to take extra precautions, although after several days of watching this guy, I was starting to think I shouldn't have bothered. Nothing seemed to be happening. I was almost ready to say we have another chat with our man when, well, I'm still not entirely sure what happened that night. I suppose this was the moment this simple investigation turned to hell. I'm still not entirely sure how to explain what happened with Richard Shannon next. Each and every logical explanation I've tried to come up with, it just doesn't fit. It was 6 nights after Rutland and I had first spoken to Shannon at the Headmaster's Steakhouse. For nights since we'd begun to shadow him. Up until then, he'd mostly behaved like a recluse. I truly don't know why things changed on that particular night. Maybe he caught wind. Then Morrow was going to make a move on him. Perhaps despite my efforts, he realized he was being watched. I can't say. Either way, 6 nights after we had approached Richard Shannon, he left his house in a hurry. It was around midnight when I watched him from across the street. He shuffled out into his car, looking more nervous than usual. As he took off down the street, I followed him at a distance. I wasn't sure where he was going, but he seemed to be in a hurry. He was heading out of town, following some darkened back RD. His headlights illuminated shadowy trees as he sped down the highway. I followed him for 45 minutes down winding back roads, leading to seemingly nowhere at some point. I turned off my headlights, and I could just barely see the distant red glow of his in the distance. He stopped then, along some unnamed, barely paved road. I did the same, pausing around the bend and turning off my car so he couldn't see or hear me. I could see movement next to his vehicle. Shannon was clearly getting out. In the faint light that came from his dying headlights, I could see his shadow walking into the forest. I watched him walk in, and then I waited. I kept an eye on my watch. Richard Shannon stayed in that darkness for over half an hour. I saw no flashlight in the trees. I saw no sign that he'd done anything, but wander aimlessly into the night. He was simply gone. When he came out again, he hurried to his car and threw himself behind the wheel. He started driving before he could even get his seatbelt on, speeding away as fast as he could. I almost lost sight of him. From there, Shannon found his way back to the main highway. When he returned to his house, I saw him step out of the driver's seat, a shade paler than he'd been before, and I noticed him clutching his right hand. I could have sworn he had a rag wrapped around, like he was injured. He didn't stay outside for long. He simply ran straight into his house and locked the door behind him through the curtains. I could see that the lights were still on. I could see his shadow pacing around doing something, but I had no idea what. The lights never switched off that night. And that morning, Richard Shannon didn't leave for work. Odd, Rutland said as he joined me the next morning. We sat side by side in my wife's car, staring at his house thoughtfully. Only one light was on now, up on the second floor. Some sort of meet-up, perhaps, he asked me. Possible, but unlikely. I didn't see any other cars out there. They'd be easy to miss in the dark, Rutland said. Maybe, but I'm not sure if this was some sort of meeting. There'd be far more practical ways to conduct one. You know, I said. Yes, there would be. But this lot of all kinds of stupid ideas they'll pass off as smart. Secret meetings at midnight in the woods, though. Well, you and I have both heard stupider things. I nodded, but I wasn't quite convinced. When I came back that evening to take my shift watching Shannon's place, Rutland didn't have any news at all for me. I'm not sure what he's been up to in there, but he hasn't left all day, he said. No visitors either. I noticed that the same light on the second floor was on. Interesting. Maybe I'll have another late-night meeting, I said, half joking. Perhaps you'll call me if anything comes up, right? Of course, I said. He nodded before saying good night and leaving. I wish I could say that the night after Shannon's little late-night drive was interesting, but it wasn't. The light on the second floor stayed on. No shadow moved inside the house. Nothing changed, and that didn't sit right with me. When Rutland returned to take over his shift that morning, I was waiting for him outside of my car. And here I thought you were trying to be subtle, he said, half teasing. Although I did see concern on his face, he took one look at that house and he knew something was wrong, just as I did. There's been no movement inside that house since the night he went into the woods, I said. There's one light on, and it hasn't changed since yesterday evening. Rutland just stared at the house in silence, his expression going dark. We both knew from experience that a man on a crime lord's hit list didn't have a very long life expectancy, and both of us knew there were plenty of ways Morrow's men could have snuck past us. For all we knew, Richard Shannon was long dead. There's only one way to find out for certain, though. Rutland exhaled before looking at me. All right, let's check in on the old man then, he said, before we walked together towards the front door. Rutland knocked, and predictably, there was no answer. He and I exchanged a look. He knocked again for courtesy's sake. I, on the other hand, was not so polite. When Shannon didn't answer, I picked the lock. The door swung open, and we calmly stepped inside. Mr. Shannon, Rutland called. No answer. I started up the stairs to the second floor, wasting no time on formalities. I spotted a closed door with a light underneath it once I got up there, and I pushed it open. What I saw inside that room defied any rational explanation I could come up with. Shannon had taken a knife to just about every surface inside of that room. He had carved some sort of ruin everywhere he could. The walls, the door, the windowsills, even the floor. The same symbol over and over again. What the hell? I said. Beside me, Rutland just stared in confused disbelief, unsure of what to make of this. It was madness. That really was the only word to describe it. The room didn't have any furniture at all. The only thing in it was a red leather-bound book on the floor. It had no title on the cover, so I picked it up and thumbed through it. What is it? Rutland asked. It's some sort of grimoire, I said softly. I opened it, and I saw the last page Shannon had read. The Man in the Forest. Rutland got closer to me. Reading the book over my shoulder, the section that Shannon had marked off described a ritual to summon some sort of demon. Enter the deepest shadows of the forest at the deepest darkness of midnight. Bring with you no protective charms or weapons. Walk until light has abandoned you. Find a suitable tree, and with a ritual dagger, mark it with your own blood. He will come drawn to the scent of blood. Call him. Make your offering. Should he fall silent, you have his attention. Should he still approach, your death is nigh. Offer up an effigy of your despised, and in your hatred, pin it to the marked tree. Should the forest be silent still, your contract is sealed. Should he draw closer, your life is ended. Thank the man in the forest, and leave quickly. Return immediately to the sanctuary you have prepared, and pray he hunts your despised before he hunts you. Pray your despised does not know how to protect themselves from him, or if they do, pray their sanctuary is weaker than yours. It cannot be stopped now. At least one of you will be shredded by his claws. Only he can decide which of you it will be. It was insane. It had to be. Complete and utter madness. Some sort of occult ritual to summon some sort of demon. To do what? Kill a man? Who? Morrow? Rutland stared down at the book, his brow furrowed in confusion. He didn't seem to know what to make of any of this either. As we stared down at the book in disbelief, our eyes were drawn towards something on the floor beneath us. There were marks in the wood, long trails scratched into it, trails that led toward an air vent in the floor. And if I didn't know any better, I might have said that they were fingernail markings. We called in homicide after that, and they found nothing. No body, no blood, nothing while I was able to present the evidence. That Rutland and I had gathered to Gemma Shaw and earned my payday from her. The case was really never closed. Richard Shannon was eventually listed as a missing persons case. The general consensus is that he went into hiding, either to hide from Morrow or to hide from us, after he realized he was being investigated. An active warrant is out for his arrest, but I know they'll never find him. Richard Shannon is gone. It was a month after his disappearance that I got an email from Neil Rutland. Rutland usually wasn't the type to stay in touch, so I knew that whatever this was, it was likely important. His email contained a couple attachments. One was a PDF of some files from the Damien Scott investigation. I skipped through them. Most of it was details I'd already heard, but Rutland had sent me something else as well. Photographs from Scott's residence in London. Most of these photos were unremarkable, but near the end of the document were several pictures of a bare room Scott had kept in his basement. A room with familiar symbols carved into the walls, onto the windowsills, onto the door, that same ruin everywhere, the very same one Shannon had used in his summoning room. The second attachment that Rutland had sent me was a video from a porch camera across the street from Damien Scott House. The footage was dated as being from the exact same night that Richard Shannon had gone into the forest. In it, I could see a car pulling up in front of Scott's house, and I could see a familiar man getting out. Jack Morrow. His face is only visible for a few moments, but it was long enough for me to tell it was him. As soon as he got out of the car, he went straight for Scott's house, running inside as fast as he could at a glance. The footage seemed strange, but mostly unremarkable. But I have watched it a few times now. I have watched it over and over again, looking for any other details I might be able to find. There is one thing in that video I can't explain. At a glance, Jack Morrow is the only person visible, but looking closer, I swear I can see another figure standing in the shadows on the left side of the screen. I swear that Morrow looks directly at that figure during the few moments where his face is on camera. And I swear that the look on his face is pure terror. I don't believe I'll be continuing with the Richard Shannon case, or any cases related to it. I'm not sure I want the answers.